supporting Aramilla if they remained free. They had tied themselves to her tightly. But with Aramilla in hand, all Elaine really would have to contend with was gaining the support of at least four more of the great houses, as if it were easy. So far, efforts in that direction had proved futile. Perhaps today would bring good news on that front, though. But this news was useless. If Aramilla and the others were riding into Camelin, it would mean the city was beyond the brink of falling. Worse, if Aramilla was boasting, she must believe it would happen soon. The woman was a fool in many ways, but it would be a mistake to underestimate her completely. She had not carried her claim
Hey,
this far by
Sasquatch,
being
how
an
you doing,
absolute
bro?
fool. This is your good
Just gotta
news,
get this shared
Jupiter
out
said.
real quick.
She saw the implications, too. A hint of when might help. Rena spread her hands. Aramilla gave Skelet a gold crown with her own hands once, my lady. He turned it over to me as proof that he's reformed. Her lips compressed for a moment. Skelet had saved himself from hanging, yet he would never regain trust. That's the only time the man's been within 10 paces of her. He has to go by what he can pick up gossiping with the other men. She hesitated. He's very afraid, my lady. The men in those camps are certain they'll take the city in a matter of days. Afraid enough to turn his coat a third time? Elaine asked quietly. There was nothing to say to the other matter. No, my lady. If Nayan or Amarilla learns what he's done, he's a dead man, and he knows it. But he's afraid if the city falls, they will learn. I think he may bolt soon. Elaine nodded grimly. Mercenaries were not the only rats to flee fire. Do you have any good news, Master Nori? The first clerk had been standing quietly, fingering his embossed leather folder and trying to appear as if he were not listening to Rena. I think I can do better, Mistress Hawthorne, my lady. There might have been a touch of triumph in his smile. Of late, it was rare for him to have better news than she. I have a man I believe can follow Nelar successfully. May I have him brought in? Now that was excellent news. 5 men had died trying to follow Doylan Mellar when he went out into the city at night, and the coincidence seemed strange. The first time it had appeared the fellow fell afoul of a footpad, and she thought nothing of it beyond settling attention on the man's widow. The guards managed to keep crime under some control, except for arson at least, yet robbers used darkness as a cloak to hide in. The other 4 had seemed the same, killed with a single knife thrust, their purses empty. But however dangerous the streets at night, coincidence hardly seemed credible. When she nodded, the spindly old man hurried to the doors and opened one to put his head out. She could not hear what he said. The ward worked both ways, but in a few minutes a burly guardsman entered, pushing ahead of him a shuffling man with fetters on his wrists and ankles. Everything about the prisoner seemed average. He was neither fat nor thin, tall nor short. His hair was brown, of no particular shade she could name, and his eyes as well. His face was so ordinary she doubted she could describe him. No features stood out at all. His clothing was just as unremarkable. A plain brown coat and breeches of neither the best wool nor the worst, somewhat rumpled and beginning to show dirt. A lightly embossed belt with a simple metal buckle that might have 10,000 twins in Camelin. In short, he was eminently forgettable. Birgitta motioned the guardsman to stop the fellow well short of the chairs and told him to wait outside. Remarkable fellow, Nori said, watching the guardsman leave. Afrin Hansard. He served your mother faithfully and knows how to keep his mouth shut. Chains? Elaine said. This is Samuel Park, my lady, Nori said, eyeing the man with the sort of curiosity he might have shown toward an unfamiliar and oddly shaped animal. A remarkably successful cut person. The guards only caught him because another ruffian, turned the cat on him, as they say in the streets, hoping to lessen his own sentence for a third offense of strong-arm robbery. A thief would be eager for that. Not only was the flogging longer, the thief mark branded on his forehead would be much harder to disguise or hide than the mark on his thumb for his second offense. Anyone who has managed to keep from being caught for as long
How's
as Master
how's
Hart
everyone's
should be
day
able
going
to
so
carry
far?
out the task I have in mind
Or
for him.
evening, should I say?
Why, innocent I am, my lady. Hart knuckled his forehead, the iron chains of his fetters clinking, and put on an ingratiating smile. He talked very quickly. It's all lies and happenstances. It is. I'm a good Queen's man, I am. I wore your mother's colours in the riots, my lady. And not that I took part in rioting, you understand. I'm a clerk when I have work, which I'm out of at the moment. But I wore her colours on my cap for all to see, I did. The bond was full of Birgitta's scepticism. Master Hark's rooms contained chests full of neatly cut purses, the first clerk went on. There are thousands of them, my lady. Quite literally thousands. I suppose you may regret keeping, trophies. Most cut purses have sense enough to get rid of the purse as soon as possible. I picks them up when I sees one, I does, my lady. Hark spread his hands as far as his chains allowed, and shrugged, the very image of injured innocence. Maybe it were foolish, but I never saw no harm. Just a harmless sort of amusement, my lady. Mistress Harforth sniffed loudly, disapproval clear on her face. Hark managed to look even more hurt. His rooms also contained coins to the value of over 120 gold crowns,
Oh, you're still
secreted
not
under the
smoking?
floorboards, in
That
cubbyholes, in the
sucks. Is
walls,
it because
in
you
the
don't have
rafters,
any, or?
everywhere. His excuse for that, Norrie raised his voice as Hark opened his mouth again, is that he distrusts bankers. He claims the money is an inheritance from an aged aunt in Four Kings. I myself very much doubt the magistrates in Four Kings will have registered such an inheritance, though. The magistrate judging his case says he seemed surprised to learn that inheritance are registered. Indeed, Hark's smile faded somewhat at being reminded. He says that he worked for Wilbin Sames, a merchant, until Sames's death 4 months ago. But Master Sames' daughter maintains the business, and neither she nor any of the other clerks recall any Samuel Hark. They hates me, they does, my lady, Hark said in a sullen voice. His hands gripped the chain between them in fists. He was gathering evidence of how there was stealing from the good master, his own daughter, mind. Only he died before I could give it to him, and I was turned out in the streets without a reference or a penny I was. They burned what I'd gathered, gave me a drubbing, and threw me out. Elaine tapped her chin thoughtfully. A clerk, you say? Most clerks aren't better spoken than you, Master Hart, but I'll offer you a chance to give evidence for your claim. Would you send for a lap desk, Master Norrie? Norrie gave a thin smile. How could the man make a smile seem dry? No need, my lady. The magistrate in the case had the same idea. For the first time that she'd ever seen, he took a sheet of paper from the folder clutched to his chest. She thought trumpets should sound. Hark's smile faded away completely as his eyes followed that page from Norrie's hand to hers. One glance was all that was needed. A few uneven lines
Oh
covered
shit.
less than half the sheet, the letters cramped and awkward.
That
No more than half a
sucks.
dozen words were actually legible, and those barely. Hardly the hand of a clerk, she murmured. Returning the page to Norrie, she tried to make her face
Oh
stern.
damn, yeah, that add up.
She had seen her mother passing judgment.
Too bad you guys can't.
More
Well, I'm
days
not
had been
sure,
able
but
to
can you
make
guys
herself
grow for
appear
yourselves?
impossible.
That way you don't have to
I
spend
fear,
money on
Master
it.
Hark, that you will sit in a cell until the magistrates in Four Kings can be queried, and soon after that you will hang. Hark's lips writhed, and he put a hand to his throat as if he could already feel the noose. Unless, of course, you agree to follow a man for me. A dangerous man who doesn't like to be followed. If you can tell me where he goes at night, instead of hanging, you'll be exiled to Bearlawn, where you would be well advised to find a new line of work. The governor will be informed of you. Suddenly Hark's smile was back. Of course, my lady. I'm innocent, but I can see how things look dark against me. I can. I'll follow any man you want me to. I was your mother's man, I was, and I'm your man too. Loyal is what I am, my lady. Loyal if I suffers for it. Wicked snorted derisively. Arrange for Master Hart to see Millar's face without being seen, Birgitta. The man was unmemorable, but there was no point in taking chances. Then turn him loose. Hart looked ready to dance, iron chains or no iron chains. But first, you see this, Master Hart? She held up her right hand so he could not miss the great serpent ring. You may have heard that I am Aes Sedai. With the power already in her, it was a simple matter to weave spirit. It is true. The weave she laid on Hark's belt buckle, his boots, his coat, and breeches was somewhat akin to that for the warder bond, though much less complex. It would fade from the clothing and boots in a few weeks, or months at best, but metal would hold a finder forever. I've laid a weave on you, Master Hart. Now you can be found wherever you are. In truth, only she would be able to find him. A finder was attuned to the one who wove it, but there was no reason to tell him that. Just to be sure that you are indeed loyal. Hark's smile seemed frozen in place. Sweat beaded on his forehead. When Birgitta went to the door and called in Hansard, getting him instructions to take Hark away and keep him safe from prying eyes, Hark staggered and would have fallen if the husky guardsman had not held him up on the way out of the room. I fear I may just have given Millar a sixth victim, Elaine muttered. He hardly seems capable of following his own shadow without tripping over his boots. It was not so much Hark's death she regretted. A man would have hanged for sure. I want whoever put that bloody man in my palace. I want them so badly my teeth ache. The palace was riddled with spies. Rena had uncovered above a dozen beyond Skelet, though she believed that was all of them. But whether Millar had been set to spy or to facilitate kidnapping her, he was worse than the others. He had arranged for men to die, or he had killed them in order to gain his place. That those men had thought they were to kill her made no difference. Murder was murder. Trust me, my lady, Norrie said, laying a finger alongside his long nose. Cut purses are, stealthy by nature, yet they seldom last long. Sooner or later they cut the purse of someone faster afoot than someone who doesn't wait for the guards. He made a quick gesture as if stabbing someone. Hark has lasted at least 20 years. A number of the purses in his collection were embroidered with prayers of thanks for the end of the Aiel War. Those went out of fashion very quickly, as I recall. Birgitta sat down on the arm of the next chair and folded her arms beneath her breasts. I could arrest Millar, she said quietly, and have him put the question. You'd have no need of Hark then. A poor joke, my lady, if I may say so, Mistress Harford said stiffly, at the same time that Master Norrie said, that would be, against the law, my lady. Birgitta bounded to her feet, outrage flooding the bond. Blood and bloody ashes! We know the man's as rotten as last month's fish. No, Elaine sighed, fighting not to feel outraged as well. We have suspicions, not proof. Those 5 men might have fallen afoul of footpads. The law is quite clear on when someone may be put to the question, and suspicions are not reason enough. Solid evidence is needed. My mother often said, the Queen must obey the law she makes, or there is no law. I will not begin by breaking the law. The bond carried something stubborn. She fixed Birgitta with a steady look. Neither will you. Do you understand me, Birgitta Trehelian? Neither will you. To her surprise, the stubbornness lasted only moments longer before dwindling away to be replaced by chagrin. It was only a suggestion, Birgitta muttered weakly. Elaine was wondering how she had done that, and how to do it again. Sometimes there seemed doubt in Birgitta's mind over which of them was in charge, when Denny Colford slipped into the room and cleared her throat to draw attention to herself. A long brass-studded cudgel balanced the sword hanging at the heavy-set woman's waist, looking out of place. Denny was getting better with the sword, but still preferred the cudgel she had used keeping order in a wagon driver's tavern. A servant came to say that the Lady Dialin has arrived, my lady, and will be at your service as soon as she's freshened herself. Send the Lady Dialin word that she's to meet me in the map room. Elaine felt a surge of hope. At last, perhaps, she might hear some good news. Chapter 17. A Bronze Bear. Leaving Mistress Harfor and Master Nori, Elaine started eagerly toward the map room, still holding Saidar. Eagerly, but not hurriedly. Denny and 3 guardswomen strode ahead of her, heads swiveling in constant search of threats, and the other 4 stamped along behind. She doubted that Dialin would take long over her ablutions, good news or bad. The light said that it was good. Birgitta, hands clasped behind her back and wearing a frown, seemed sunk in silence as they walked, though she studied every crossing corridor as if expecting an attack from it. The bonds still carried worry and tiredness. A yawn cracked Elaine's jaws before she could stop herself. An unwillingness to start rumors was not the only reason she maintained a stately pace. There were more than servants in the hallways now. Courtesy had required her to offer rooms in the palace to the nobles who managed to reach the city with armsmen, counting armsmen loosely. Some were well trained and carried a sword every day. Others had been guiding a plow before being called to follow their lord or lady, and a fair number had accepted. Mainly those who had no dwelling in Camelin, or, she suspected, felt pinched for coin. Farmers or laborers might think all nobles wealthy, and certainly most were, if only in comparison. But the expenses required by their positions and duties left many counting coins as carefully as any farm wife. What she was to do for the newest arrivals she did not know. Nobles already were sleeping 3 and 4 to a bed wherever the beds were large enough. All but the narrowest could take at least 2, and did. Many kinswomen had been reduced to pallets on the floor in the servants' quarters, and thank the light, spring had made that possible. It seemed the whole lot of her noble guests were out strolling, and when they offered her courtesies, she had to stop and pass at least a few words. Serge's Gilberne, small and slim in a green riding dress, her dark hair lightly touched with white, who had brought all 20 of the armsmen in her service, and vinegary old Kelwyn Janivor, wiry in his discreetly darned blue wool coat, who had brought 10, received as gracious an exchange as did lanky Beryl Layton and stout Anthella Sharplin, though they were high seats, if of minor houses. All had written to her support with whatever they could gather, and none had turned back on learning the odds. Many looked uneasy today, though. No one said anything of it. They were all full of good wishes and hopes for a speedy coronation, and how honored they were to follow her, but worry was written on their faces. Aralinda Brandstrom, normally so ebullient you might think she believed her 50 armsmen could turn the tide for Elaine by themselves, was not the only woman chewing her lip. And Laerid Traham, stocky and taciturn and usually as stolid as stone, was not the only man with a furrowed brow. Even news of Gaivon and the aid he had brought caused only brief smiles, quickly swallowed in ill ease. "Do you think they've heard of Aramilla's confidence?" she asked in one of the brief intervals when she was not responding to bows and curtsies. No, that wouldn't be enough to upset Aralinda or Laerid. Aramilla inside the walls with 30,000 men likely would fail to upset that pair. It wouldn't, Birgitta agreed. She glanced around as if to see who beside the guardswomen might hear before going on. Maybe they're worried over what's been worrying me. You didn't get lost when we got back. Or rather, you had help. Elaine paused to offer a few hurried words to a gray-haired couple in woolens that would have suited prosperous farmers. Brannin and Elvain Martin's manor house was much like a large farmhouse, sprawling and housing generations. A third of their armsmen were their sons and grandsons, nephews and great-nephews. Only those too young or too old to ride had been left behind to see the planting. She hoped the smiling pair did not feel they were getting short shrift, but she was walking on almost as soon as she stopped. "What do you mean, I had help?" she demanded. "The palace is changed." For a moment there was confusion in the bond. Birgitta grimaced. "It sounds mad, I know, but it's as if the whole thing had been built to a slightly different plan." One of the guardswomen ahead missed a step, caught herself. I have a good memory. Birgitta hesitated, the bond filled with a jumble of emotions hastily pushed down. Most of her memories of past lives had vanished as surely as the winter's snow. Nothing remained before the founding of the White Tower, and the 4 lives she had lived between then and the end of the Trolloc Wars were beginning to fragment. Little seemed to frighten her, yet she feared losing the rest, especially her memories of Guidal Kane. I don't forget a path once I've followed it, she went on, and some of these hallways aren't the same as they were. Some of the corridors have been shifted. Others aren't there anymore, and there are some new. Nobody is talking about it that I could find out, but I think the old people are keeping quiet because they're afraid their wits are going, and the younger are afraid they'll lose their positions. That's... Elaine shut her mouth. Clearly it was not impossible. Birgitta did not suffer from sudden fancies. Neris's reluctance to leave her apartments suddenly made sense, and perhaps Rena's earlier puzzlement, too. She almost wished being with child really had befuddled her. But how? Not the Forsaken, she said firmly. If they could do something like this, they'd have done it long since, and worse than... A good day to you, too, Lord Aubrham. Lean and craggy and bald, save for a thin white fringe, Aubrham Pensinor should have been dandling his grandchildren's children on his knee, but his back was straight, his eyes clear. He had been among the first to reach Camelin, with near to 100 men, and the first news that it was Aramilla Marn marching against the city, with Nahum and Elenia supporting her. He began reminiscing about riding for her mother in the succession, until Birgitta murmured that Lady Dylan would be waiting for her. Oh, in that case, don't let me delay you, my lady, the old man said heartily. Please give my regards to Lady Dylan. She's been so busy I've not exchanged 2 words with her since reaching Camelin. My very best regards, if you will. House Pensinor had been allied to Dylan's Taravin since time out of mind. Not the Forsaken, Birgitta said once Aubrham was out of earshot. But what caused it is only the first question. Will it happen again? If it does, will the changes always be benign? Or might you wake up and find yourself in a room without doors or windows? What happens if you're sleeping in a room that disappears? If a corridor can go, so can a room. And what if it's more than the palace? We need to find out if all the streets still lead where they did. What if the next time part of the city wall isn't there anymore? You do think dark thoughts, Elaine said bleakly. Even with the power in her, the possibilities were enough to give her a sour stomach. Birgitta fingered the 4 golden knots on the shoulder of her white-collared red coat. They came with these. Strangely, the worry carried by the bond was less, now that she had shared her concerns. Elaine hoped the woman did not think she had answers. No, that really was impossible. Birgitta knew her too well for that. Does this frighten you, Denny? She asked. I'll admit it does me. No more than needful, my lady, the blocky woman answered, without stopping her careful scan of what lay ahead. Where the others walked with a hand on their sword hilts, her hand rested on her long cudgel. Her voice was as placid and as matter-of-fact as her face. One time a big wagon man named Eldrin Hackley came near breaking my neck. Not usually a rough man, but he was drunk beyond drunk that night. I couldn't get the angle right, and my cudgel seemed to bounce off his skull without making a dent. That frightened me more because I knew certain sure I was about to die. This is just maybe, and any day you wake up, maybe you die. Any day you wake up, maybe you die. There were worse ways to look at life, Elaine supposed. Still, she shivered. She was safe, at least till her babes were born, but no one else was. The 2 guards at the wide, lion-carved doors to the map room were experienced guardsmen, one short and the next thing to scrawny, the other wide enough to appear squat, though he was of average height. Nothing visible picked them out from any other men in the guards, but only good swordsmen, trusted men, got this duty. The short man nodded to Denny, then straightened his back stiffly at a disapproving frown from Birgitta. Denny smiled at him shyly. Denny? Shyly? While a pair of guardswomen went through the inevitable routine, Birgitta opened her mouth, but Elaine laid a hand on her arm, and the other woman looked at her, then shook her head, thick golden braids swaying slowly. It's not good when they're on duty, Elaine. They should be seeing to their duties, not mooning over each other. She did not raise her voice, yet color appeared in Denny's round cheeks, and she stopped smiling and started watching the corridor again. It was better that way, perhaps, yet still a pity. Somebody ought to have a little pleasure in their lives. The map room was the second largest ballroom in the palace, and spacious, with 4 red-streaked marble fireplaces where small fires burned beneath the carved mantels. A domed ceiling worked with gilt and supported by widely spaced columns, 2 spans from white marble walls that had been stripped of tapestries, and sufficient mirrored stand lamps to light the room as well as if it had windows. The greatest part of its tiled floor was a detailed mosaic map of Camelin, originally laid down above 1,000 years ago, after the new city had been completed, though before Low Camelin began growing. Long before there was an Andor, even before Arthur Hawkley. It had been redone several times since, as tiles faded or became worn, so every street was exact. At least they had been until today. The light said they still were. And despite many buildings replaced over the years, even some of the alleys were unchanged from what the huge map showed. There would be no dancing in the map room for the foreseeable future, however. Long tables between the columns held more maps, some large enough to spill over the edges, and shelves along the walls held stacks of reports. Those not so sensitive, they needed to be locked away, or else committed to memory and burned. Birgitta's wide writing table, nearly covered with baskets, most full of papers, stood at the far end of the room. As Captain General, she had her own study, but as soon as she discovered the map room, she had decided the map and the floor made it too good not to use. A small wooden disc, painted red, marked the spot on the outer wall where the assault had just been beaten back. Birgitta scooped it up in passing and tossed it into a round basket full of the things on her writing table. Elaine shook her head. It was a small basket, but if there were enough attacks at once to need that many markers. My lady Birgitta, I have that report on available fodder you asked for, a graying woman said, holding out a page covered with neat lines. The white lion was worked small on the breast of her neat brown dress. 5 other clerks went on with their work, pens scritching. They were among Master Norrie's most trusted, and Mistress Harford had personally screened the 6 messengers in red and white livery, swift young men, boys really, who stood against the wall behind the clerks' small writing tables. One, a pretty youth, began a vow before cutting it short with a blush. Birgitta had settled the question of courtesies to her or other nobles with very few words. Work came first, and any noble who disliked that could just avoid the map room. Thank you, Mr. Sanford. I'll look at it later. If you and the others will wait outside, please. Mr. Sanford quickly gathered up the messengers and the other clerks, giving them only time to stopper their ink jars and blot their work. No one showed a glimmer of surprise. They were accustomed to the need for privacy at times. Elaine had heard people call the map room the secrets room, though nothing very secret was kept there. All of that was locked away in her apartments. While the clerks and messengers were filing out, Elaine strode to one of the long tables where a map showed Camelin and its surroundings for at least 50 miles in each direction. Even the Black Tower had been inked in, a square sitting less than 2 leagues south of the city. A growth on Andor, and no way to be rid of it. She still sent parties of guardsmen to inspect some days via gateways, but the place was large enough that the Ashaman could have been up to anything without her learning of it. Pins with enameled heads marked Aramilla's 8 camps around the city, and small metal figures, various other camps. A falcon, finely wrought in gold and no taller than her little finger, showed where the Goshin were, or had been. Were they gone yet? She slipped the falcon into her belt pouch. Avienda was very much a falcon. On the other side of the table, Birgitta raised a questioning eyebrow. They're gone, or going, Elaine told her. There would be visits. Avienda was not gone forever. Sent somewhere by Rand. Where, I don't know. Burn him. I wondered why Avienda wasn't with you. Elaine laid one finger atop a bronze horseman less than a hand tall, standing a few leagues west of the city. Someone needs to take a look at Davram Bashir's camp, find out whether the Saldaeans are leaving too, and the Legion of the Dragon. It did not matter if they were, really. They had not interfered in matters, thank the light, and the time when fear that they might restrain Aranella was long past. But she disliked things happening in Andor without her knowledge. Send guardsmen to the Black Tower tomorrow as well. Tell them to count how many Ashaman they see. So he's planning a big battle. Another big battle. Against the Shonchan, I suppose. Folding her arms beneath her breasts, Birgitta frowned at the map. I'd wonder where and when, except we have enough in front of us to be going on with. The map displayed the reasons Aranella was pressing so hard. For one, to the northeast of Camelin, almost off the map, lay the bronze image of a sleeping bear, curled up with its paws over its nose. 200,000 men, near enough, almost as many trained men as all of Andor could field. 4 borderland rulers, accompanied by perhaps a dozen Aes Sedai they tried to keep hidden, searching for Rand, their reasons unstated. Borderlanders had no cause to turn against Rand that she could see, though the simple fact was he had not bound them to him as he had other lands. But Aes Sedai were another matter, especially with their allegiance uncertain, and 12 approached a dangerous number even for him. While the 4 rulers had in part deciphered her motives for asking them into Andor, yet she had managed to mislead them concerning Rand's whereabouts. Unfortunately, the Borderlanders had belied every tale of how swiftly they could move as they crept south, and now they sat in place, trying to find a way to avoid coming near a city under siege. That was understandable, even laudable. Outland armies in close proximity to Andoran armsmen on Andoran soil would make for a touchy situation. There were always at least a few hotheads. Bloodshed and maybe war could start all too easily under those circumstances. Even so, bypassing Camelin was going to be difficult. The narrow country roads had been turned to bogs by the rains, giving hard passage to an army that large. Elaine could have wished they had marched another 20 or 30 miles toward Camelin, though. She had hoped their presence would have had a different effect by now. It might still. More importantly, certainly to Aranella and possibly to herself, a few leagues below the Black Tower stood a tiny silver swordsman, with his blade upright in front of him, and a silver halberdier, plainly by the same silversmith's hand, one to the west of the Black Square, the other to the east. Luon, Elorian, and Abella, Aemlin, Arathella, and Pelavar had close to 60,000 men between them in those 2 camps. Their estates and those of the nobles tied to them must have been stripped near the bone. Those 2 camps were where Dylan had been these past 3 days, trying to learn their intentions. The spindly guardsman opened one of the doors and held it for an elderly serving woman carrying a ropework silver tray with 2 tall golden wine pitchers and a circle of goblets made of blue seafolk porcelain. Rena must have been uncertain how many would be present. The frail woman moved slowly, careful not to tilt the heavy tray and drop anything. Elaine channeled flows of air to take the tray, then let them dissipate, unused. Implying that the woman could not do her job would only be hurtful. She was effusive in her thanks, though. The old woman smiled broadly, clearly delighted, and offered her a deep curtsy, once unburdened of the tray. Dylan arrived almost right behind the maid, an image of vigor, and shooed her out before grimacing over the contents of one pitcher. Elaine sighed. Doubtless it held goat's milk, and filling a goblet from the other. Plainly, Dylan had confined her freshening to washing her face and brushing her hair, golden flecked with gray, because her dark gray riding dress with a large round silver pin worked with Taravin's owl and oak on the high neck had spots of half-dried mud on the skirts. "There's something seriously amiss," she said, swirling the wine in her goblet without drinking. A frown deepened the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. "I've been in this palace more times than I can remember, and today I got lost twice." "We know about that," Elaine told her. and quickly explained what little they had puzzled out, what she intended to do. Belatedly, she wove a ward against eavesdropping and was unsurprised to feel it slice through Sidar. At least whoever had been listening in would get a jolt from that. A small jolt, since so little of the power was involved that she had not sensed it. Maybe there was a way to make it a hard jolt next time, though. Maybe that would begin to discourage eavesdroppers. So, it might happen again, Darlin said when Elaine was done. Her tone was calm, but she licked her lips and took a swallow of wine, as if her mouth was suddenly dry. Well, well then. If you don't know what caused it, and you don't know whether it will happen again, what are we to do? Elaine stared. Again, someone seemed to think she had answers she did not. But then, that was what it meant to be queen. You were always expected to have an answer, to find one. That was what it meant to be Aes Sedai. We can't stop it, so we'll live with it, darling, and try to keep people from growing too afraid. I'll announce what happened as much as we know and have the other sisters do the same. That way people will know that Aes Sedai are aware, and that should provide some comfort. A little. They'll still be frightened, of course, but not as much as they'll be if we say nothing and it does happen again. That seemed a feeble effort to her, but surprisingly Dylan agreed without hesitation. I myself can suggest nothing else to be done. Most people think you Aes Sedai can handle anything. It should suffice in the circumstances. And when they realized that Aes Sedai could not handle anything, that she could not, well, that was a river that she would cross when she reached it. Is the news good or bad? Before Dylan could answer, the door opened again. I heard that Lady Darlin had returned. You should have sent for us, Elaine. You aren't queen yet, and I dislike you keeping secrets from me. Where is Avienda? Catelyn Hayden, a cool-eyed, ungovernable young woman, a girl in truth, still long months short of her majority, though her guardian had abandoned her to go her own way, was pride to her toenails, her plump chin held high. Of course, that might have been because of the large enamel pin of Hayden's blue bear that decorated the high neck of her blue riding dress. She had begun showing Dylan respect, and a certain wariness, shortly after she started sharing a bed with her and Sergei's. But with Elaine, she insisted on every perquisite of a high seat. We all heard, Conal Norton said. Lean and tall in a red silk coat with laughing eyes and an eagle's beak of a nose, he was of age, just, a few months past his 16th name day. He swaggered and caressed the hilt of his sword much too fondly, but there seemed no harm in him, only boyishness, an unfortunate trait in a high seat. And none of us could wait to hear when Luan and the others will join us. This pair would have run the whole way. He ruffled the hair of the two younger boys with him, Paraval Mantiar and Branlet Gilliard, who gave him a dark look and raked fingers through his hair to straighten it. Paraval blushed. Quite short, but already pretty. He was the youngest at 12, yet Branlet had only a year on him. Elaine sighed, but she could not ask them to leave. Children, most of them might be, perhaps all, considering Conrad's behavior, yet they were the high seats of their houses, and along with Dylan, her most important allies. She did wish she knew how they had learned the purpose of Dylan's journey. That had been intended to be a secret until she knew what news Dylan brought. Another task for Rena. Gossip unchecked, the wrong gossip, could be as dangerous as spies. Where is Avienda? Catelyn demanded. Strangely, she had become quite taken with Avienda. Fascinated might have been a better word. Of all things, she had persisted in trying to make Avienda teach her to use a spear. So, my lady, Conal said, strolling over to fill a blue goblet with wine. When are they joining us? The bad news is that they aren't, Dylan said calmly. The good news is that they've each rejected an invitation to join Aramilla. She cleared her throat loudly as Branlet reached for the wine pitcher. His cheeks reddened, and he picked up the other pitcher as if he had really meant to all along. The high seat of House Gilliard, yet still a boy for all of the sword on his hip. Paraval also wore a sword, one that dragged on the floor tiles and looked too big for him, but he had already taken goat's milk. Pouring her own wine, Catelyn smirked at the younger boys, a superior smile that vanished when she noticed Dialin looking at her. "That's small turnips to call good news," Birgitta said. "Burn me if it isn't. You bring back a bloody half-starved squirrel and call it a side of beef." "Pungent as always," Dialin said dryly. The two women glared at one another, Birgitta's hands balling into fists, Dialin fingering the dagger at her belt. "No arguing," Elaine said, making her voice sharp. The anger in the bond helped. At times she feared the pair might come to blows. "I won't put up with your bickering today." "Where's Avienda?" "Gone, Catelyn." "What else did you learn, Dialin?" "Gone where?" "Gone away," Elaine said calmly. Sidar or no Sidar, she wanted to slap the girl's face. "Dialin?" The older woman took a sip of wine to cover breaking off her staring match with Birgitta. Coming to stand beside Elaine, she picked up the silver swordsman, turned him over, set him down again. "Aemlyn, Arafella, and Pelivar tried to convince me to announce a claim to the throne, but they were less adamant than when I spoke with them last. I believe I've almost convinced them I won't do it." "Almost?" Birgitta put a hundredweight of derision in the word. Dialin ignored her pointedly. Elaine frowned at Birgitta, who shifted uncomfortably and stalked off long enough to get herself a goblet of wine. Very satisfying. Whatever she was doing right, she hoped it continued to work. "My lady," Perival said with a bow, extending one of two goblets he held to Elaine. She managed a smile and a curtsy before taking the offering. Goat's milk. Right, but she was beginning to revile the stuff. "Luan and Abella were non-committal," Dialin continued, frowning at the halberdier. "They may be swaying toward you." She hardly sounded as though she believed it, however. "I reminded Luan that he helped me arrest Mayon and Elenia back in the beginning, but that may have done no more good than it did with Pelivar. So they may all be waiting for Aramilla to win," Birgitta said grimly. "If you survive, they'll declare for you against her. If you don't, one of them will make her own claim. Elorian has the next best right after you, doesn't she?" Dialin scowled, but she offered no denials. "And Elorian?" Elaine asked quietly. She was sure she knew the answer there already. Her mother had had Elorian flogged. That had been under Ravine's influence, but few seemed to believe that. Few seemed to believe Gabriel had even been Ravine. Dialin grimaced. "The woman's head is stone. She'd announce a claim in my name if she thought it would do any good. At least she has enough sense to see it won't." Elaine noted that she made no mention of any claims in Elorian's own name. "In any case, I left Karilas Hertofni and Julania folk to watch them. I doubt they'll move, but if they do, we'll know straight away." Three kinswomen who needed to form a circle to travel were watching the Borderlanders for the same reason. No good news at all, then, no matter what face Dialin tried to put on it. Elaine had hoped the threat of the Borderlanders would drive some of the houses to support her. "At least one reason I let them cross Andor still holds," she thought grimly. Even if she failed to gain the throne, she had done that service for Andor. Unless whoever did take the throne bungled matters completely. She could see Aramilla doing just that. Well, Aramilla was not going to wear the rose crown, and that was that. One way or another, she had to be stopped. "So it's 6, and 6, Catelyn said, frowning and thumbing the long signet ring on her left hand. She looked thoughtful, unusual for her. Her usual style was to speak her mind with no consideration whatsoever. "Even if Candraed joins us, we are short of 10. Was she wondering whether she had tied Haven to a hopeless cause? Unfortunately, she had not tied her house so tightly the knots could not be undone. "I was certain Luan would join us," Conile muttered. "And Abella and Pelivar." He took a deep swallow of wine. "Once we beat Aramilla, they'll come. You mark me on it. But what are they thinking? Branlett demanded. Are they trying to start a war with 3 sides? His voice went from treble to bass halfway through that, and his face flushed with red. He buried his face in his goblet, but grimaced. Apparently he liked goat's milk as little as she did. It's the Borderlanders. Farival's voice was a boy's piping, but he sounded sure of himself. They're holding back because whoever wins here, the Borderlanders still have to be dealt with. He picked up the bear, hefting it as if its weight would give him answers. What I don't understand is why they're invading us in the first place. We're so far from the borderlands. And why haven't they marched on and attacked Camelot? They could sweep Aramilla aside, and I doubt we could keep them out as easily as we do her. So why are they here? Smiling, Conal clapped him on the shoulder. Now that will be a battle to see when we face the Borderlanders. Northam's Eagles and Mantiar's Anvil will do Andor proud that day, eh? Paraval nodded, but he did not look happy at the prospect. Conal certainly did. Elaine exchanged glances with Dylan and Birgitta, both of whom looked amazed.
Right back.
Elaine felt astonished herself. The other 2 women knew, of course, but little Paraval had come near touching a secret that had to be kept. Others might puzzle out eventually that the Borderlanders had been meant to push houses into joining her, but it must not be confirmed. Luan and the others sent to Aramilla asking for a truce until the Borderlanders were turned back, Dylan said after a moment. She asked time to consider. As near as I can calculate, it was then that she began increasing her efforts at the walls. She tells them she's still considering. Aside from anything else, Catelyn said heatedly, that shows why Aramilla doesn't deserve the throne. She puts her own ambition above Andor's safety. Luan and the others must be fools not to see it. Not fools, Dylan replied. Just men and women who think they see the future better than they do. What if she and Dylan were the ones who were not seeing the future clearly? Elaine wondered. To save Andor, she would have thrown her support to Dylan. Not gladly, but to save Andor's blood, she would have. Dylan would have the support of 10 houses, more than 10. Even Danine Candread might finally decide to stir herself in support of Dylan, except that Dylan did not want to be queen. She believed that Elaine was the one to wear the rose crown. So did Elaine. But what if they were wrong? Not the first time that question had come to her, but now, staring at the map with all of its ill tidings, she could not shake free of it. That evening, after a dinner memorable only for the surprise of tiny strawberries, she sat in the large sitting room of her apartments, trying to read. The leather-bound book was a history of Andor, as was most of her reading of late. It was necessary to read as many as possible to gain any real version of truth, cross-checking one against another. For one thing, a book first published during any monarch's reign never mentioned any of her missteps, or those of her immediate predecessors if they were of her own house. You had to read books written while Trakand held the throne to learn of Mantiar's mistakes, and books written under Mantiar to learn of Norwelland's errors. Others' mistakes could teach her how not to make the same herself. Her mother had made that almost her first lesson. She could not concentrate, however. She often found herself staring at a page without seeing a word, thinking of her sister, or starting to say something to Avienda before remembering that she was not there. She felt very lonely, which was ridiculous. Stephanie stood in a corner against the possibility she wanted anything. 8 guardswomen were standing outside the door to the apartments, and one of them, Urith Azeri, was an excellent conversationalist, an educated woman, though silent on her past. But none of them was Avienda. When Van Dien glided into the room, followed by Christian and Zarya, it seemed a relief. The 2 white-clad women stopped by the doorway, expressions meek. Untouched by the oath rod, pale Christian, hands folded at her waist, appeared just into her middle years. Zarya, with her tilted eyes and hooked nose, well short of them. She held something wrapped in white toweling. "Forgive me if I'm interrupting," Van Dien began, then frowned. The white-haired Green's face somehow gave an impression of age, despite her Aes Sedai features. Those could have been 20 or 40 or anything in between. That seemed to change at every blink. Perhaps it was her dark eyes, luminous and deep and pained, which had seen so much. There was an air of tiredness about her, too. Her back was straight, but she still looked weary. "It is none of my business, of course," she said delicately. "But is there a reason you are holding so much of the power? I thought you must be reading something very complex when I felt you in the corridor." With a start, Elaine realized that she held nearly as much of Saidar as she could contain safely. How had that happened? She did not recall drawing any deeper. Hastily, she released the source, regret filling her as the power drained away, and the world became ordinary again. On the instant, her mood bounced sideways. "You aren't interrupting anything," she said peevishly, setting her book down on the table in front of her. She had not finished 3 pages of the thing anyway. "May I make us private, then?" Elaine gave a curt nod. It was none of the woman's bloody business how much of the power she held. She knew the protocols as well as Elaine, or better, and told Stephanie to wait in the anteroom while Van Deen wove a ward against eavesdropping. Ward or no ward, Van Deen waited until the door closed behind the maid before speaking. "Rihanna Corley is dead, Elaine." "Oh, Light! No!" Temper vanished into sobs, and she hastily snatched a lace-edged handkerchief from her sleeve to blot the tears suddenly streaming down her cheeks. Her cursed, shifting moods at work. Yet Rihanna surely deserved tears. She had so wanted to become a green. "How?" Burn her, she wished she could stop blubbering. There were no tears from Van Deen. Perhaps there were no more tears in her. She was smothered with the power. Whoever did it used much more than was needed. The residues of Saidar were thick on her and in the room where she was found. The murderer wanted to be sure no one would miss seeing how she died. "That makes no sense, Van Deen." "Perhaps it does."
Battery low. Battery 10%.
Along the table and unwrapped it to reveal an articulated wooden doll. It was very old, the simple dress threadbare, the painted face flaking and missing an eye, half of its long dark hair gone. "This belonged to Miraine Larnan," Zarya said. "Darius Nirmala found it behind a cupboard." "I don't see what Miraine leaving a doll behind has to do with Rihanna's death," Elaine said, wiping her eyes. Miraine was one of the kinswomen who had run away. "Only this," Van Deen answered. "When Miraine went to the tower, she hid this doll outside because she had heard that everything she owned would be burned. After she was put out, she retrieved it and always carried it with her, always. She had a quirk, though. Wherever she stopped for a time, she hid the doll again. Do not ask me why, but she would not have run away and abandoned it." Still dabbing at her eyes, Elaine leaned back in her chair. Her weeping had dwindled to sniffles, but her eyes still leaked tears. "So, Miraine didn't run away. She was murdered and disposed of." A grisly way to put it. "The others, too, you think? All of them?" Van Deen nodded, and for a moment her slender shoulders slumped. "I very much fear so," she said, straightening. "I expect clues were left among the things they left behind. Treasured keepsakes like this doll, a favorite piece of jewelry. The murderer wanted us to think she was being clever at hiding her crimes, but not clever enough. Only we weren't clever enough to find those clues, so she decided to become more blatant." "To frighten the kinswoman into fleeing," Elaine muttered. "That would not cripple her, but it would throw her back on the mercies of the Windfinders, and those seemed to be growing mingy." "How many of them know of this?" "All by now, I should think," Van Deen said dryly. "Zarya told Darius to keep quiet, but that woman likes the sound of her own voice." "This seems aimed at me, at helping Aramilla gain the throne. But why would a Black sister have any interest in that? I can't think we have 2 murderers among us." "At least this settles the question of Marililla. Speak with Sumiko and Elise, Van Deen. They can make sure the rest don't panic." Sumiko ranked next after Rihanna, as the kin ordered their hierarchy, and while Elise stood much lower, she was a woman of great influence. From now on, none of them is to be alone. Not ever. Always at least two together, and three or four would be better. And warn them to be careful of Cariana and Sarita. I'd advise against that, Van Dien said quickly. They should be safe in groups, and word would reach Cariana and Sarita. Warned against Aes Sedai? The kin would give themselves away in a minute. Christian and Zarya nodded solemnly. After a moment, Elaine reluctantly agreed to the continued secrecy. The kin should be safe in groups. Let Shanella know about Rihanna and the others. I can't imagine the Windfinders are in any danger. Losing them wouldn't hurt me the way losing the kin would. But wouldn't it be wonderful if they did decide to leave? She did not expect that they would. Shanella feared returning to the sea folk with the bargain unfulfilled. Yet it would be a bright spot in an otherwise miserable day if they did. At least it seemed unlikely anything could darken the day further. The thought sent a chill through her. The lights and nothing would darken it more. Aramilla pushed her plate of stew away with a grimace. She'd been offered her choice of beds for the night. Arlene, her maid, was making the choice now. The woman knew what she liked. And the least she had expected was a decent meal. But the mutton was fatty, and definitely beginning to go rancid besides. There had been too much of that lately. This time the cook was going to be flogged. She was unsure which of the nobles in this camp employed him, just that he was supposed to be best at hand. The best! But that did not matter. He would be flogged to make an example, and then sent away, of course. You could never trust a cook after he'd been punished. The mood in the tent was far from lively. Several of the nobles in the camp had hoped for invitations to dine with her, but none stood high enough. She was beginning to regret not asking one or two, even some of Nayan or Elenia's people. They might have been entertaining. Her closest allies at table together, and you might have thought they sat over funeral meats. Oh, scrawny old Nason, his thinning white hair uncombed, was eating away heartily, apparently not noticing that the meat was nearly rotten, and giving her fatherly pats on the hand. She met his smiles like a dutiful daughter. The fool was wearing one of his flower-embroidered coats tonight. The thing could have passed for a woman's dressing robe. Happily, his leers were all directed down the table at Elenia. The honey-haired woman flinched, her fox-like face paling whenever she glanced at him. She controlled House Sarand as if she were the high seat instead of her husband, yet she feared that Aramilla would still let Nason have his way with her. That threat was unneeded now, but it was well to have it to hand just in case. Yes, Nason was happy enough in his futile pursuit of Elenia, but the others were sunk in gloom. Their plates were abandoned, barely touched, and they kept her two serving men trotting to refill wine cups. She never liked trusting others' servants. At least the wine had not turned. I still say we should make a heavier push, Lear grumbled drunkenly into his cup. A whip of a man, his red coat showing the wear of armor straps, the high seat of Baron was ever eager to strike. Subtlety was simply beyond him. My eyes and ears report more armsmen entering the city every day through these gateways. He shook his head and muttered something under his breath. The man actually believed those rumors of dozens of Aes Sedai in the royal palace. All these pinprick attacks do is lose men. I agree, Karen said, fiddling with a large golden pin enameled with the running red fox of Anshar that was fastened to her bosom. She was not much less intoxicated than Lear. Her square face had a slackness about it. We need to press home instead of throwing men away. Once we're over the walls, our advantage in numbers will pay off. Aramilla's mouth tightened. They might at least show her the respect due a woman who was soon to be Queen of Andor, rather than disagreeing with her all the time. Unfortunately, Baron and Anshar were not bound to her so tightly as Sarand and Aron. Unlike Jared and Nayan, Lear and Karen had announced their support of her without publishing it in writing. Neither had Nason, but she had no fear of losing him. Him she had wound around her wrist for a bracelet. Forcing a smile, she made her voice jovial. We lose mercenaries. What else are mercenaries good for if not dying in place of our armsmen? She held up her wine cup, and a lean man in her silver-trimmed blue hastened to fill it. In fact, he was so hasty that he spilled a drop on her hand. Her scowl made him snatch a handkerchief from his pocket to blot up the drop before she could pull her hand away. His handkerchief! The light only knew where that filthy thing had been. He touched her with it. His mouth writhed with fear as he retreated, bowing and mumbling apologies. Let him serve out the meal. He could be dismissed after. We will need all of our armsmen when I ride against the borderlanders. Don't you agree, Mayhem? Mayhem twitched as though stuck with a pin. Slim and pale in yellow silk worked with silver patterns of Aron's triple keys on the breast, she had begun looking haggard in recent weeks, her blue eyes drawn and tired. All of her supercilious airs were quite gone. Of course, Aramilla, she said meekly, and drained her cup. Good. She and Delania were definitely tamed, but Aramilla liked to check now and then to make sure neither was growing a new backbone. If Luan and the others will not support you, what good will taking Kenland do? Sylvaise, Mason's granddaughter and heir, spoke so seldom that the question came as a shock. Sturdy and not quite pretty, she usually had a vapid gaze, but her blue eyes appeared quite sharp at the moment. Everyone stared at her. That seemed not to faze her a bit. She toyed with a wine cup, but Aramilla thought it no more than her second. If we must fight the Borderlanders, why not accept Luan's truce, so Andor can field its full strength unhindered by divisions? Aramilla smiled. She wanted to slap this silly woman. Mason would be angered by that, however. He wanted her kept as Aramilla's guest to prevent his removal as High Seat. Part of him seemed aware that his wits were gone. All of him intended holding on as High Seat until he died, but he did love her. Elorian and some of the others will come to me yet, child, she said smoothly. Smoothness required some effort. Who did the chits think she was? Aemlyn, Aracella, Helavar, they have grievances against Trakan. Surely they would come once Elaine and Dialin were out of the way. Those two would not survive Caemlyn's fall. Once I have the city, they will be mine in any event. 3 of Elaine's supporters are children, and Conile Northam is little more than a child. I trust I can convince them to publish their support of me easily enough. And if she could not, Master Lunalt surely could. A pity if children had to be handed over to him and his cords. I will be queen by sunset of the day Caemlyn falls to me. Isn't that right, Father? Mason laughed, spraying goblets of half-chewed stew across the table. Yes, he said, patting Aramilla's hand. You listen to your aunt, Sylvaise. Do as she tells you. She'll be Queen of Andor soon. His smile faded, and an odd note entered his voice. It might almost have been pleading. Remember, you will be High Seat of Cairn after I'm gone. After I'm gone, you will be High Seat. As you say, Grandfather, Sylvaise murmured, inclining her head briefly. When she straightened, her gaze was as insipid as ever. The sharpness must have been a trick of the light. Of course. Mason grunted and went happily back to wolfing down the stew. Best I've had in days. I think I'll have another plate. More wine here, man. Can't you see my cup's dry? The silence around the table stretched in discomfort. Mason's more
Fire, how you
open
doing?
senility had a way of causing that. I still say,
Hope
Weir
you're doing
began
good.
finally, only to cut off as a stocky armsman with Marn's 4 silver moons on his chest entered the tent. Bowing respectfully, the fellow made his way around the table and bent to whisper in Aramilla's ear. Master Hernville asks a word in private, my lady. Everyone but Mason and his granddaughter pretended to concentrate on their wine, certainly not attempting to eavesdrop. He went on eating. She watched Aramilla, bland face. That sharpness must have been a trick of the light. I'll be but a few moments, Aramilla said, rising. She waved a hand, indicating the food and wine. Enjoy yourselves until I return. Enjoy. Lear called for more wine.
Got a good rest. Hell yeah.
Outside, she did not bother raising her skirts to keep them
Oh,
clear
yeah.
of the mud.
Oh,
Arlene would
you can
already
always
have to
your
clean
body
them,
can
so
always
what did a
use a
little more
rest.
mud matter? Light showed in some tents, but by and large the camp was dark beneath the half moon. Jacob Hernville, her
I'm
secretary,
gonna have
waited a
to
little away from the tent in a
start
plain
a
coat,
little
holding a lantern that made a yellow pool around him. He
fund
was a
up
little
for
man and lean, as
a
if all
new
the fat had
TV
been
as well as
boiled from him.
another chair.
Discretion was bred in his bones, and she ensured his loyalty by paying him enough that only the largest bribes could be of interest, far more than anyone would
Let's see
offer
what I
as
can show
frivolous.
you. I went to grab my
Forgive
TV
me
to
for
try to
interrupting
move it
your
off
meal,
my
he
dresser.
said with a bow, but I
I
was
guess
sure
I
you would want to
grabbed
hear
it in the
right
wrong
away.
spot and
It was
just
always a surprise hearing such a deep
broke my
voice from
TV.
such a tiny man. They have agreed, but they want a whole amount of gold first. Her lips compressed of their own accord. The whole amount. She had hoped to get off with paying only the first half. After all, who would dare dun her once she was queen? Draw up a letter to Mistress Anne's scale. I'll sign and seal it first thing in the morning. Transferring that much gold would require days. And how long to have the armsman ready? She'd never really paid attention to that sort of thing. Lear could tell her, but she hated showing weakness. Tell them a week from tomorrow to the
In the
day.
top is big old
That should be enough.
like section. It's all black
Payment
and
was
all the
hers.
line. Yeah,
The throne
they did a
would be
number on
hers.
it, so you can see a
Aramilla,
little bit
by the
better
grace of
this
the
way.
light, Queen of Andor, defender of the realm, protector of the people, high seat of House Marn. Smiling, she went back inside to tell the others the wonderful news.
Chapter 18. News for the Dragon. Enough, Loyal, Rand said firmly, thumbing tobacco into his short-stemmed pipe from a goatskin pouch.
It
was tyrant leaf, with a
works.
slightly oily taste from the curing, but that was all that was to be had.
Not the
Thunder rolled
greatest.
overhead, slow and ponderous. You'll talk me hoarse with all these questions. They were seated at a long table in one of the larger rooms in Lord Algaren's manor house, the remains of the midday meal pushed down to one end. The servants were old,
I've seen that.
and slower moving
looked
than
it up
ever
already.
since Algaren left for the Black Tower. The rain pouring down outside seemed to be slackening, though strong gusts of wind still pelted the windows with raindrops hard enough to rattle the glass in the 6 yellow-painted casements.
Try to come up with the money
Many of
somehow.
those panes held bubbles. Some distorted what lay outside almost beyond recognition. The table and chairs were simply carved, no more elaborate than might be found in many farmhouses, and the yellow cornices beneath the high-beamed ceiling little more so. The 2 fireplaces at either end of the room were broad and tall, but of plain stone, the andirons and fire tools sturdy wrought iron and simple. Lord or no,
I swear,
Algaren was
if I didn't have
wealthy.
bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck at all.
Tucking the tobacco pouch into his pocket, Rand strolled to one of the fireplaces and used small brass tongs from the mantel to lift a burning sliver of oak for lighting his pipe. He hoped no one thought that strange. He avoided channeling any more than absolutely necessary, especially if anyone else was present. The dizziness that hit him when he did was difficult to conceal. But no one had mentioned it so far. A gust of wind brought a squeaking as though tree branches had scraped across the window panes. Imagination. The nearest trees were beyond the fields, more than half a mile away. Loyal had brought down a vine-carved chair from the Ogier rooms that put his knees level with the tabletop, so he had to lean forward sharply to write in his leather-bound notebook. The volume was small for him, little enough to fit neatly into one of his capacious coat pockets, but still as large as most human books Rand had seen. Fine hair decorated Loyal's upper lip, and a patch beneath his chin. He was attempting a beard and mustaches, though with only a few weeks' growth, it did not seem a very successful attempt so far.
But you've told me almost nothing really useful,
the Ogier rumbled, a drum booming its disappointment. His tufted ears drooped. Even so, he began wiping the steel nib of his polished wooden pen. Fatter than Rand's thumb, and long enough to
Let's
seem
do a little
slender,
dab
it
before
fitted
we
Loyal's thick
smoke a
fingers
joint.
perfectly.
You never mention heroics, except by somebody else. You make it all sound so everyday. To hear you tell it, the fall of Ilion was as exciting as watching a weaver repair her loom. And cleansing the true source, you and Nynaeve linked, then you sat and channeled while everybody else was off fighting Forsaken. Even Nynaeve told me more than that, and she claims to remember almost nothing.
Nynaeve, wearing all of her jeweled tirangrial and her strange bracelet and rings angrial, shifted in her chair in front of the other fireplace, then went back to watching Olivia. Every so often she glanced toward the windows and tugged at her thick braid, but for the most part she focused on the yellow-haired Shonchan woman. Standing beside the doorway like a guard, Olivia gave a small, brief smile of amusement. The former Damani knew Nynaeve's display was meant for her. The intensity never left her hawkish blue eyes, though. It seldom had, ever since her collar had been removed in Camelin. The two maidens squatting on their heels near her playing cat's cradle, Arlen of the Iron Mountain Tardat and Anila of the Jara Charin, were making their own display. Shufa wrapped around their heads and black veils hanging down their chests, each had 3 or 4 spears stuck through the harness, holding her bow case on her back and a bullhide buckler lying on the floor. There were 50 maidens in the manor house, several of them Shido, and they all went about ready to dance the spears in a heartbeat. Perhaps with him. They seemed torn between delight at providing a guard for him again and displeasure over how long he had avoided them. As for himself, he could not look at any of them without the litany of women who had died for him, women he had killed, starting up in his head. Moraine Domadret, her above all. Her name was written inside his skull in fire. Leah of the Corsada Charin, Sandara of the Iron Mountain Tardat, the Mela of the Smokewater Miagoma, Andalin of the Red Salt Goshin, Desara of the Musara Rain. So many names.
Excuse me.
Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night muttering that list, with Min holding him and murmuring to him as if soothing a child. He always told her he was all right and wanted to go back to sleep. And after he closed his eyes, he did not sleep until the list had been completed. Sometimes Luce Theron chanted it with him. Min looked up from the volume she had open on the table, one of Herod Fell's books. She devoured those, and used the note he had sent Rand before his murder, the one where he said she was a distraction because she was so pretty, as a bookmark. Her short blue coat, embroidered with white flowers on sleeves and lapels, was cut over her bosom, where her creamy silk blouse showed a cleavage, and her big dark eyes, framed by dark ringlets to her shoulders, held a pleased light. He could feel her pleasure through the bond. She liked him looking at her. Without a doubt, the bond told her how much he liked looking. Oddly enough, it said she liked looking at him, too. Pretty? He hummed, thumbing his earlobe. She was beautiful, and tied to him tighter than ever. She and Elaine and Avienda. I wish he could keep them safe now. He forced himself to smile back at her around his pipe stem, unsure how well the deception was working. A touch of irritation had entered the bond from her end, though why she should become irritable whenever she thought he was worrying about her was beyond him. Right, she wanted to protect him. Rand isn't very talkative, loyal, she said, no longer smiling. Her low, almost musical voice held no anger, but the bond told another story. In fact, sometimes he's about as talkative as a mussel. The look she directed at Rand made him sigh. It seemed there would be a great deal of talking once they were alone together. I can't tell you much myself, but I'm sure Cat Swain and Varen will tell you anything you want to know. Others will too. Ask them if you want more than yes and no and 2 words aside. Stout little Varen, knitting in a chair beside Nynaeve, appeared startled to hear her name mentioned. She blinked vaguely as though wondering why it had been. Cadswain, at the far end of the table with her sewing basket open beside her, only took her attention away from her embroidery hoop long enough to glance at Loyal. Golden ornaments swayed, dangling from the iron-gray bun atop her head. It was only that, a glance, not a frown, yet Loyal's ears twitched. Aes Sedai always impressed him, and Cadswain more than any other,
Oh, that was a good
So
one
I
there.
will, Min, I will.
he said.
But Rand is central to my book.
With no sand jar at hand, he began blowing gently on the page of his notebook to dry the ink. But Loyal being loyal, he still talked between puffs.
You never give enough detail, Rand. You make me drag everything out of you. Why, you never even mentioned being imprisoned in Far Madding until Min did. Never mentioned it. What did the Council of Nine say when they offered you the Laurel Crown? And when you renamed it? I can't think they like that. What was the coronation like? Was there feasting, a festival, parades? How many Forsaken came against you at Shadalogeth? Which ones? What did it look like at the end? What did it feel like? My book won't be very good without the details. I hope Matt and Perrin give me better answers.
He frowned, long eyebrows grazing his cheeks.
I hope they're all right.
Colors spun in Rand's head. Twin rainbows swirled in water. He knew how to suppress them now, but this time he did not try. One resolved into a brief image of Matt riding through forest at the head of a line of mounted folk. He seemed to be arguing with a small, dark woman who rode beside him, taking his hat off and peering into it, then cramming it back onto his head. That lasted only moments, then was replaced by Perrin, sitting over wine cups in a common room or tavern with a man and a woman who wore identical red coats ornately trimmed with blue and yellow. Odd garments. Perrin looked grim as death, his companions wary of him. "They're well," he said, calmly ignoring a piercing look from Cadswain. She did not know everything, and he intended to keep it that way. Calm on the surface, content, blowing smoke rings. Inside was another matter. Where are they? He thought angrily, pushing down another appearance of the colors. That was as easy as breathing now. I need them, and they're off for a day at the Anseline Gardens. Abruptly, another image was floating in his head, a man's face, and his breath caught. For the first time, it came without any dizziness. For the first time, he could see it clearly in the moments before it vanished. A blue-eyed man with a square chin, perhaps a few years older than himself. Or rather, he saw it clearly for the first time in a long while. It was the face of the stranger who had saved his life in Shadalogeth when he fought Samael. Worse.
He was aware of me.
Lews Theron said. He sounded sane for a change. Sometimes he did, but the madness always returned eventually.
How can a face appearing in my mind be aware of me?
If you don't know, how do you expect me to? Rand thought. But I was aware of him as well. It had been a strange sensation, as if he were touching the other man somehow, only not physically. A residue hung on. It seemed he only had to move a hair's breadth in any direction to touch him again. I think he saw my face too. Talking to a voice in his head no longer seemed peculiar. In truth, it had not for quite a long time. And now? Now he could see Matt and Perrin by thinking of them or hearing their names, and he had this other face coming to him unbidden. More than a face, apparently. What was holding conversations inside his own skull alongside that? But the man had been aware and Rand of him. When our streams of balefire touched in Shadalogeth, it must have created some sort of link between us. I can't think of any other explanation. That was the only time we ever met. He was using their so-called true power. It had to be that. I felt nothing, saw nothing except his stream of balefire. Having bits of knowledge seem his when he knew they came from Lews Theron no longer seemed odd either. He could remember the Anseline Gardens, destroyed in the War of the Shadow, as well as he did his father's farm. Knowledge drifted the other way, too. Lews Theron sometimes spoke of Emmons Field as if he had grown up there. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, light, why do I have this voice in my head?
Luce Theron moaned.
Why can I not die? Oh, Ilyena, my precious Ilyena, I want to join you.
He trailed off into weeping. He often did when he spoke of the wife he had murdered in his madness. It did not matter. Rand suppressed the sound of the man crying, pushed it down to a faint noise on the edge of hearing. He was certain he was right. But who was the fellow? A dark friend, for sure, but not one of the Forsaken. Luce Theron knew their faces as well as he knew his own, and now Rand did too. A sudden thought made him grimace. How aware of him was the other man? Taviran could be found by their effect on the pattern, though only the Forsaken knew how. Luce Theron never mentioned knowing. Their conversations were always brief, and the man seldom gave information willingly, and nothing had drifted across from him on the subject. At least Lanfear and Ishamael had known how, but no one had found him that way since they had died. Could this link be used in the same fashion? They could all be in danger, more danger than usual, as if the usual were not enough.
Are you well, Rand?
Boyle asked worriedly, screwing the leaf-engraved silver cap onto his ink jar. The glass of that was so thick it could have survived anything short of being hurled against stone, but Boyle handled it as though it were fragile. In his huge hands, it looked fragile.
I thought the cheese tasted off, but you ate a good bit of it.
I'm fine, Rand said, but of course Nynaeve paid him no heed. She was out of her chair and gliding down the room in a flash, blue skirts swirling. Goosebumps popped out on his skin as she embraced Sayadaw and stretched to lay her hands on his head. An instant later, a chill rippled through him. The woman never asked. Sometimes she behaved as if she was still the wisdom in Emmons Field, and he would be heading back to the farm come morning. You're not ill, she said in tones of relief. Spoiled food was causing all sorts of sickness among the servants, some of it serious. People would have died except for the presence of Ashaman and Aes Sedai to give healing. Reluctant to cost their lords scarce money by throwing food out, despite all the admonitions Cadsuane and Nynaeve and the other Aes Sedai gave them, they fed themselves things that should have been tossed on the midden heap. A different tingling centered briefly around the double wound in his left side. That wound is no better, she said with a frown. She had tried healing it, but she didn't know better than Flynn had. That did not sit well with her. Nynaeve took failure as a personal insult. How can you even stand up? You must be in agony. He ignores it, Min said flatly. Oh yes, there would be words. It hurts no worse standing than sitting, he told Nynaeve, gently taking her hands from his head. Simple truth. So was what Min had said. He could not afford to let pain make him a prisoner. One of the twin doors creaked open to admit a white-haired man in a worn yellow coat trimmed with red and blue that hung loosely on his bony frame. His bow was halting, a fault of his joints rather than disrespect.
My Lord Dragon,
He said in a voice nearly as creaky as the hinges.
Lord Loghain has returned.
Loghain did not wait on invitations, entering practically on the serving man's heels. A tall man with dark hair curling to his shoulders,
Fire,
and
the only
dark
thing that
heel
sucks about the
banding, women
TV
might be
is
thought him handsome.
trying to get it on
Yet there was a streak
a
of
fixed
darkness
income.
inside him as well.
So I'm
He
on
wore his black
disability,
coat with
so
the sword and the dragon on the high
I
collar,
get a check
and
once
a
a
long
month.
hilted sword on his hip. But he had made an
Yeah,
addition,
that
a
check's
round
already gone.
enameled pin on his shoulder, showing 3 golden crowns in a field of blue. Had the
Between
man
rent and
adopted a
bills.
sigil? The old
Maybe
man's
because how
hairy
much they
eyebrows
charge for
shot
rent
up
in
in
this town.
surprise, and he looked around as if inquiring whether he wanted Loghain removed. The news from Andor is fair enough, I suppose, Loghain said, tucking black gauntlets behind his sword belt. He offered Rand a minimal bow, the slightest bending of his back. Elaine still holds Caemlyn, and Aramilla still holds her siege. But Elaine has the advantage, since Aramilla can't even stop food getting in, much less reinforcements. No need to scowl. I kept out of the city. Blackcoats aren't exactly welcome there in any case. The Borderlanders are still in the same place. You were wise to stay clear of them, it seems. Rumor says there are 13 Aes Sedai with them. Rumor says they're looking for you. Has Bashir gotten back yet? Nynaeve gave him a scowl and moved away from Rand, gripping her braid tightly. Aes Sedai bonding Ashaman was all very well in her book, but not the reverse. 13 and looking for him? He had stayed clear of the Borderlanders because Elaine did not welcome his help. Interference, she called it, and he had begun to see that she had the right of it. The Lion Throne was hers to gain, not his to give. But perhaps it was as well that he had. The Borderland rulers all had ties to the White Tower, and no doubt Elida was still eager to get her hands on him. Her and that mad proclamation about no one approaching him except through her. If she believed that would force him to come to her, she was a fool. Thank you. That will be all, Ethan. Lord Logain? He asked, as the serving man bowed himself out with a last disgruntled glance at Logain. Rand thought the man would have tried had he told him to haul Logain out. The title is his by birth, Catswain said without looking up from her embroidery. She would know. She had helped capture him back when he was calling himself the Dragon Reborn. He and Taim both. Her hair ornaments bobbed as she nodded to herself. Pah! A minor lordling with a scrap of land in the mountains, most of it all but straight up and down. But King Johannan and the Crown High Council stripped him of his lands and title after he became a false dragon. Small spots of color appeared in Logain's cheeks, yet his voice was cool and composed. They could take my estate, but they could not take away who I am. Still seemingly intent on her embroidery needle, Catswain laughed softly. Baron's knitting needles had stopped. She was studying Logain, a plump sparrow, studying an insect. Olivia had shifted her intense gaze to the man, too. And Harlan and Delilah seemed to be just going through the motions of their game. Min appeared to be reading still, but each hand rested near the opposite cuff of her coat sleeves. She kept some of her knives hidden there. None of them trusted him. Rand frowned. The man could call himself whatever he wanted, so long as he did what he was supposed to. But Catswain prodded him, and anyone else in the black coat, nearly as much as she did Rand himself. He was unsure how far to trust Logain either, yet he had to work with the tools he had to hand. Is it done? With Logain here, Loyal was uncapping his ink jar again. More than half the Black Tower is in Arad-Daman and Ilium. I sent all the men with bonded Aes Sedai except those here, as you ordered. Logain walked to the table while he talked, found the blue-glazed pitcher that still held wine among the plates and scraps, and filled the green-glazed cup. There was very little silver in the house. You should have let me bring more men here. The numbers tilt too much to Aes Sedai for my liking. Rand grunted. Since part of that is your doing, you can live with it. Others will have to as well. Go on. Dobrain and Ruark will send a soldier with a message as soon as they find anyone in charge of more than a village. The Council of Merchants claim King Al-Salam still reigns, but they wouldn't or couldn't produce him or say where he is. They seem to be at one another's throats themselves. And Bandar Eben is more than half deserted and given over to the mob. Logain grimaced into his wine cup. Gangs of strong-arms provide what little order there is, and they extort food and coin from the people they claim to protect and take whatever else they want, including women. The bond suddenly held white-hot rage, and Nynaeve growled in her throat. Ruark has set about putting an end to that, but it was already turning into a battle when I left, Logain finished. Strong arms won't hold out long against Aiel. If Dobrain can't find anyone in charge, then he will have to be for the time being. If Al-Salam was dead, as seemed likely, he would have to appoint a steward for the Lord Draken in Arad-Daman. But who? It would have to be someone Damani would accept. The other man took a long swallow of wine. Taim wasn't pleased at me taking so many men out of the tower and not telling him where they were going. I thought he was going to rip up your order. He tried every trick to learn where you are. Oh, he burns to know that. His eyes were practically on fire. I wouldn't put it past him to have put me to the question if I'd been fool enough to meet him without company. One thing pleased him, though, that I didn't take any of his cronies. That was plain on his face. He smiled, a dark smile, not amused. There are 41 of those now, by the way. He's given over a dozen men the dragon pin in the past few days, and he has about 50 more in his special classes, most of them men recruited just lately. He's planning something, and I doubt you'll like it. I told you to kill him when you had the chance. Loose there and cackled in mad mirth. I told you, and now it's too late, too late. Rand angrily expelled a stream of blue-gray smoke. Give over, he said, meaning it for both Logain and Luce Theron. Taim built the Black Tower till it nearly matches the White Tower for numbers, and it grows every day. If he's a dark friend the way you claim, why would he do that? Logain met his stare levelly. Because he couldn't stop it. From what I've heard, even in the beginning, there were men who could travel who weren't his toe-eaters, and he had no excuse to do all the recruiting himself. But he's made a tower of his own, hidden inside the Black Tower, and the men in it are loyal to him, not you. He amended the deserters list and sends his apologies for an honest mistake, but you can wager all you own it was no mistake. And how loyal was Logain? If one false dragon chafed at following the Dragon Reborn, why not another? He might think he had cause. He had been far more famous as a false dragon than Taim, more successful, gathering an army that swept out of Girardon and nearly reached Lugard on its way to Tyr. Half the known world had trembled at the name Logain. Yet Nazran Taim commanded the Black Tower, while Logain Ablar was only another Ashaman. Men still saw an aura of glory around him. Just how that glory was to be achieved was beyond her viewing, however. He took the pipe from his mouth, and the bowl was hot against the heron branded into his palm. He must have been puffing away furiously without being aware of it. The trouble was, Taim and Logain were lesser problems. They had to wait. The tools at hand. He made an effort to keep his voice even. Taim took their names off the list. That's the important thing. If he's showing favoritism, I'll put an end to it when I have time. But the Shongshan have to come first. And maybe Tom and Gaiden, too. If, Logain growled, slamming his cup down on the table so hard that it broke. Wine spread across the tabletop and dripped over the edge.
Number one
Scowling,
down.
he wiped his damp hand on his coat. Do you think I'm imagining things? His tone grew heated by the word. Or making them up? Do you think this is jealousy, Althor? Is that what you think? You listen to me, Rand began, raising his voice against a peal of thunder. I told you I expected you and your friends in black coats to be civil to me, my friends, and my guests, Cad Swain said sternly. But I've decided that must be expanded to include each other. Her head was still bent over her embroidery hoop, but she spoke as if she were shaking a finger under their noses. At least when I am present. That means if you continue squabbling, I may have to spank both of you. Arlen and Delilah began laughing so hard they got the string of their game in a snarl. Nynaeve laughed too, though she tried to hide it behind her hand. Light even Min smiled. Logain bristled, jaw tightening, until Rand thought he should hear the man's teeth grating. He was trying hard not to bristle himself. Cad Swain and her bloody rules. Her conditions for becoming his advisor. She pretended that he had asked for them, and every so often she added another to her list. The rules were not precisely onerous, though their existence was, but her way of presenting them was always like a poke with a sharp stick. He opened his mouth to tell her he was finished with her rules, and with her too, if need be. Taim very likely will have to wait on the last battle, whatever he's about, Baron said suddenly. Her knitting, A shapeless lump that might have been anything sat in her lap. It will come soon. According to everything I've read on the subject, the signs are quite clear. Half the servants have recognized dead people in the halls, people they knew alive. It's happened often enough that they aren't frightened by it any longer. And a dozen men moving the cattle to spring pasture watched a considerable town melt into mist just a few miles to the north. Cadswain had raised her head and was staring at the stout brown sister. Thank you for repeating what you told us yesterday, Baron, she said dryly. Baron blinked, then took up her knitting again, frowning at it as though she too were unsure what it was going to be. Min caught Rand's eyes, shaking her head slowly, and he sighed. The bond held irritation and wariness, the last deliberate warning to him, he suspected. At times, she seemed to be able to read his mind. Well, if he needed Cadswain, and Min said he did, then he needed her. He just wished he knew what she was supposed to teach him aside from how to grind his teeth. Advise me, Cadswain. What do you think of my plan? At last the boy asks, she murmured, setting her embroidery down beside her sewing basket. All his schemes in motion, some had not been made privy to, and now he asks. Very well. Your peace with the Shonchan will be unpopular. A truce, he broke in, and a truce with the Dragon Reborn will last only as long as the Dragon Reborn. When I die, everyone will be free to go to war with the Shonchan again if they wish. Min slammed her book shut and folded her arms beneath her breasts. Don't you talk that way, she said, red-faced with anger. The bond also carried fear. The prophecies, Min, he said sadly. Not sad for himself, but for her. He wanted to protect her and Elaine and Avienda, but he would hurt them in the end. I said you don't talk that way. The prophecies don't say you have to die. I'm not going to let you die, Randall Thor. Elaine and Avienda and I won't let you. She glared at Olivia, who her viewing had said would help Rand die, and her hands slid down her arms toward her cuffs. Behave, Min, he said. Her hands shot away from her cuffs, but she set her jaw, and the bond suddenly was flooded with stubbornness. Right, was he going to have to worry about Min trying to kill Olivia? Not that she was likely to succeed. As well try throwing a knife at an Aes Sedai as at the Shonchan woman. But she might get herself injured. He was not sure Olivia knew any weaves but those for weapons. Unpopular, as I say, Cadswain said firmly, raising her voice. She favored Min with a brief frown before turning her attention back to Rand. Her face was smooth, composed, an Aes Sedai's face. Her dark eyes were hard, like polished black stones. Especially in Terabon, Amadisia, and Altara, but also elsewhere. If you agree to allow the Shonchan to keep what they've already taken, what lands will you give away next? That is how most rulers will see matters. Rand dropped back into his chair, stretching his legs in front of him and crossing his ankles. It doesn't matter how unpopular it is. I went through that door frame Tirangrial in Tyr, Cadswain. You know about that? Golden ornaments bobbled as she nodded impatiently. One of my questions for the Aelfin was, how can I win the last battle? A dangerous question to pose, she said quietly, touching on the shadow as it does. Supposedly, the result can be quite unpleasant. What was the answer? The north and the east must be as one. The west and the south must be as one. The two must be as one. He blew a smoke ring, put another in the middle of it as it expanded. That was not the whole of it. He had asked how to win and survive. The last part of his answer had been, to live, you must die. Not something he was going to bring up in front of Min anytime soon. In front of anyone except Olivia, for that matter. Now he just had to figure out how to live by dying. At first I thought it meant I had to conquer everywhere, but that wasn't what they said. What if it means the Shonchan hold the west and south, as you could say they already do, and there's an alliance to fight the last battle. The Shan with everybody else. It's possible, she allowed. But if you're going to make this truce, why are you moving what seems to be a considerable army to Ardaman and reinforcing what is already in Ilion? Because Tom Gaiden is coming, Catswain, and I can't fight the Shadow and the Shan at the same time. I'll have a truce or I'll crush them, whatever the cost. The prophecies say I have to bind the 9 moons to me. I only understood what that meant a few days ago. As soon as Bashir returns, I'll know when and where I'm to meet the daughter of the 9 moons. The only question now is how do I bind her, and she'll have to answer that. He spoke matter-of-factly, now and then blowing a smoke ring for punctuation. Reactions varied. Loyal just wrote very fast, trying to capture every word, while Harlan and Denada went on with their game. If the spears had to be danced, they were ready. Olivia nodded fiercely, doubtless hoping it would come to crushing those who had kept her wearing Adon for 500 years. Logain found another wine cup and filled it with the last of what was in the pitcher, but he merely held the cup rather than drinking, his expression unreadable. Now it was Rand whom Varen studied intently, but then she had always been curious about him. But why in the life would Min feel bone-deep sadness? And Cadswain? Stone cracks from a hard enough blow, she said, her face an Aes Sedai mask of calm. Steel shatters. The oak bites the wind and breaks. The willow bends where it must and survives. A willow won't win Tom and Gaiden, he told her. The door creaked open again, and Ethan tottered in. My lord Dragon, 3 Ogier have arrived. They were most pleased to learn that Master Loyal is here. One of them is his mother. My mother? Loyal squeaked, and even that sounded like a hollow wind gusting in caverns. He leaped up so fast that his chair fell over backwards, wringing his hands, ears wilting. His head swung from side to side as if he were hunting for a way out besides the door. What am I going to do, Rand? The other 2 must be Elder Hammond and Aerith. What am I going to do? Mistress Covrell said she was most anxious to speak with you, Master Loyal, Ethan said in that creaky voice. Most anxious. They are all damp from the rain, but she said they will wait for you in the Ogier sitting room upstairs. What am I going to do, Rand? You said you want to marry Aerith, Rand said as gently as he could. Gentleness was difficult except with men. But my book, my notes aren't complete, and I'll never find out what happens next. Aerith will take me back to studying Sofu with her. Ah. Cadswain picked up her embroidery again and began working the needle delicately. She was making the ancient symbol of Aes Sedai. The dragon's fang and the flame of Tarvalin melded into a disc, black and white separated by a sinuous line. Go to your mother, Loyal. If she's Covril, daughter of Ella, daughter of Soon, you don't want to keep her waiting. As I expect, you know. Loyal seemed to take Cadswain's words as a command. He began wiping his pen nib again, capping his ink jar. But he did everything very slowly, with his ears drooping. Every so often he moaned sadly, half under his breath. My book. Well, Varen said, holding up her knitting for inspection, I believe I've done all that I can here. I think I'll go find Thomas. The rain makes his knee ache, though he denies it even to me. She glanced at the window. It does seem to be slowing. And I think I'll go find Lan, Nynaeve said, gathering her skirts. The company is better where he is. That with a sharp tug on her braid and a glare divided between Olivia and Logain. The wind tells me a storm is coming, Rand. And you know I don't mean rain. The last battle? Rand asked. How soon? When it came to weather, listening to the wind could sometimes tell her when the rains would come to the hour. It may be, and I don't know. Just remember, a storm is coming.
Dab, but
A terrible storm.
gotta charge it.
Overhead, thunder rolled. Chapter 19.
So
Vows.
this will have to do.
Uneasy, Loyal watched Nynaeve glide off down the lamp-lit corridor in one direction and Varen in the other. Neither was much taller than his waist, but they were Aes Sedai. The fact knotted his tongue sufficiently that by the time he had worked up his nerve to ask one of them to accompany him, both were out of sight around sharp corners. The manor house was a rambling place, added to over many years with no real overall plan that he could discern, and hallways frequently met at odd angles. He really wished he had an Aes Sedai for company when he faced his mother. Even Cadswain, although she made him very nervous with how she was always pinching at Rand. Sooner or later, Rand was going to explode. He was not the same man Loyal first met in Camelin, or even the man he had left in Kyrian. The mood around Rand was dark and stony now, a dense patch of lion's claw and treacherous ground underfoot. The whole house felt that way with Rand in it. A lean, gray-haired serving woman carrying a basket of folded towels gave a start, then shook her head and muttered something under her breath before offering him a brief curtsy and walking on. She made a small sidestep as though she was moving around something, or someone. He stared at the spot and scratched behind his ear. Maybe he could only see Ogier dead. Not that he really wanted to. It was sad enough just knowing that human dead could move. Having the same confirmed for Ogier would be enough to break his heart. Most likely they would appear only inside Steading in any case. He would very much like to see a town vanish, though. Not a real town, but a town that was as dead as those spirits the humans claimed to see. You might be able to walk its streets before it melted and see what people were like before the War of the 100 Years, or even the Trolloc Wars. So Varen said, and she seemed to know a very great deal about it. That would certainly be worth a mention in his book. It was going to be a fine book. Scratching his beard with 2 fingers, the thing itched. He sighed. It would have been a fine book. Standing there in the corridor was only putting off the inevitable. Put off clearing the brush, and you always find chokevine in it, so the old saying went. Only he felt as though the chokevine was tied around him instead of a tree. Breathing hard, he followed the serving woman all the way to the wide stairs that led up to the Ogier rooms. The staircase had 2 sturdy banisters,
Hell yeah,
shoulder
fire.
high on the gray-haired woman,
These
and
are
stout
close
enough
that I
to give a
got right
decent
now.
handhold. He was often afraid just to brush against stair rails made for humans for fear he might break them. One ran down the middle, with the steps along the wood-paneled hall pitched for human feet, those on the outside for Ogier. The woman was old, as humans counted years, yet she climbed more quickly than he and was scurrying down the corridor by the time he reached the top. Doubtless she was taking the towels to his mother's room and to Elder Hammond's and Aerith's. Surely they would prefer to get dry before talking. He would suggest that. It would gain him time to think. His thoughts seemed as sluggish as his feet, and his feet felt like millstones. There were 6 bedrooms built for Ogier along the corridor, which itself was properly scaled for them. His upstretched hands would have come a pace short of touching the ceiling beams, along with a storeroom, a bathing room with a large copper tub, and the sitting room. This was the oldest part of the house, dating back nearly 500 years. A lifetime for a very old Ogier, but many lifetimes for humans. They lived such brief lives, except for Aes Sedai. That had to be why they flitted about like hummingbirds. But even Aes Sedai could be nearly as precipitous as the rest. That was a puzzlement. The sitting room door was carved with a great tree. Not Ogier work, yet finely detailed and instantly recognizable. He stopped, tugging his coat straight, combing his hair with his fingers, wishing he had time to black his boots. There was an ink stain on his cuff. No time to do anything about that either. Cadswain was right. His mother was not a woman to be kept waiting. Strange that Cadswain knew of her. Perhaps knew her by the way she had spoken. Covril, daughter of Ella, daughter of Sun, was a famous speaker, but he had not realized she was known outside. Right, he was all but panting with anxiety. Trying to control his breathing, he went in. Even here the hinges creaked. The servants had been aghast when he asked after some oil to put on them, That was their task. He was a guest. But they still had not gotten around to it themselves. The high-ceilinged room was quite spacious, with dark polished wallpapers, and vine-carved chairs, and small vine-carved tables, and wrought-iron stand lamps of a proper size, their mirrored flames dancing above his head. Except for a shelf of books, all old enough that the leather bindings were flaking, and all of which he had read before, only a small bowl of sungwood was ogier made. A nice piece. He wished he knew who had sung it. But it was aged enough that singing to it had failed to raise so much as an echo. Yet everything had been made by someone who at least had been to a steading. The pieces would have looked at home in any dwelling. Of course, the room looked nothing like a room in a steading, but Lord Elgaren's ancestor had made an effort to have his visitors feel comfortable. His mother was standing in front of one of the brick fireplaces, a strong-faced woman, with her vine-embroidered skirts spread to let the flames dry them. He heaved a sigh of relief at seeing she was not as wet as he had expected, although it put paid to suggesting that they take the time to get dry. Their rain-cloaks must have developed leaks. They did that after a time, as the aniseed oil wore off. Maybe her temper would not be as bad as he feared either. White-haired Elder Hammond, his flaring coat dark with damp in several large patches, was examining one of the axes from the wall, shaking his head over it. Its haft was as long as he was tall. Made during the Trolloc Wars, or even before, there were a pair of those, the long axe heads inlaid with gold and silver, and a pair of ornate pointed pruning knives with long shafts as well. Of course, pruning knives, sharp on one side and soft on the other, always had long handles, but the inlays and long red tassels indicated that these had been made for weapons too. Not the most felicitous choices for hanging in a room meant for reading or conversation, or the quiet contemplation of study. But Loyal's eyes swept past his mother and Elder Hammond to the other fireplace, where Aerith was drying her own skirts, short and almost fragile appearing. Her mouth was straight, her nose short and well-rounded, her eyes the exact color of a silver bell's ripe seed pod. In short, she was beautiful. And her ears, sticking up through the glossy black hair that hung down her back, curving and plump, tipped with fine tufts that looked as soft as dandelion down, they were the most gorgeous ears he had ever seen. Not that he would be crude enough to say so. She smiled at him, a very mysterious smile, and his own ears quivered with embarrassment. Surely she could not know what he had been thinking. Could she? Rand said women could sometimes, but that was human women.
So, here you are,
His mother said, planting her fists on her hips. There were no smiles from her. Her brows were drawn down, her jaw set. If this was her better temper, she might as well have been drenched.
I must say you've led me a merry chase, but I have you in hand now, and I do not mean to let you run. What is that on your lip? And your chin? Well, you can shave those right off again. Don't you grimace at me, son Loyal.
Fingering the growth on his upper lip uneasily, he tried to smooth his face. When your mother named you son, she was in no mood to trifle with. But it was hard. He wanted his beard and mustaches. Some might think it pretentious, as young as he was, but just the same.
A merry chase indeed.
Elder Hammond said dryly, hanging the axe back on its hooks. He had long white mustaches that fell past his chin, and a long narrow beard that hung to his chest. True, he was well above 300 years old, but it still seemed unfair.
A very merry chase. First we walked to Kyrian, having heard you were there, only you had gone. After a stop at Stedding Tsofu, we walked to Camden, where young Alfor informed us you were in the Two Rivers and took us there. But you were gone again. To Camden, it seemed.
His eyebrows rose almost to his hairline.
I began to think we were playing Ring in the Dell.
The people in Emmons Field told us how heroic you were, Aerith said, her high voice like music. Clutching her skirts with both hands, ears fluttering with excitement, she seemed about to bounce up and down.
They told us all about you fighting Trollocs and Murdroll, and going out among them by yourself to seal the Manetheren Waygate so no more could come. I wasn't by myself,
Loyal protested, waving his hands. He thought his ears might fly from his head. They were twitching so with embarrassment.
Gaul was with me. We did it together. I'd never have reached the Waygate without Gaul.
She wrinkled her delicate nose at him, dismissing Gaul's participation. His mother sniffed. Her ears were rigid with distaste.
Foolishness. Fighting in battles, putting yourself in danger, gambling, all of it. Pure foolishness, and there will be no more of it.
Elder Hammond harumphed, ears twitching irritably, and folded his hands behind his back. He disliked being interrupted.
So we returned to Camelin to find you gone, and then to Kyrian once more to find you gone yet again. And you put yourself in danger again in Kyrian,
Loyal's mother broke in, shaking a finger at him.
Have you no sense at all? The Aiel said you were very brave at Dumai's Wells.
Oh, yeah,
Aerith
cheers.
murmured, looking at him through her long eyelashes. He swallowed hard. Her gaze made his throat feel tight. He knew he should look away, but how could he be demure when she was looking at him?
In Kyrian, your mother decided she couldn't stay away from the Great Stump any longer, though why I cannot say, since they aren't likely to reach any sort of decision for another year or two, so we set out to return to Setting Shanghai in the hope we could find you later.
Elder Hammond said all of that very fast, glaring at the two women as if he thought they might break in on him again. His beard and mustaches seemed to bristle. Loyal's mother gave another sniff, sharper.
I expect to bring a decision very quickly, in a month or two, or I'd never have given over the search for Loyal, even temporarily. Now that I've found him, we can finish matters and be on our way without any more delay.
She took in Elder Hammond, who was frowning, his ears slanted back, and amended her tone. He was an elder, after all.
Forgive me, Elder Hammond. I meant to say, if it pleases you, will you perform the ceremony? I believe that it does please me, Cockrill,
he said mildly, much too mildly. When Loyal heard that tone from his teacher, with ears back, he had always known that he had put a foot very badly wrong. Elder Hammond had been known to throw a piece of chalk at a pupil when he used that tone.
Since I abandoned my students, not to mention speaking to the Great Stump to follow you on this wild chase for that very reason, I believe it does please me indeed. Aerith, you are very young. She's past 80, old enough to marry,
Loyal's mother said sharply, folding her arms across her chest. Her ears twitched with impatience.
Her mother and I reached agreement. You yourself witnessed us signing the betrothal and Loyal's dowry.
Elder Hammond's ears tilted back a little further, and his shoulders hunched as if he was gripping his hands together very hard behind his back. His eyes never left Aerith.
I know you want to marry, Loyal, but are you sure you are ready? Taking a husband is a grave responsibility.
Loyal wished someone would ask him that question, but that was not the way. His mother and Aerith had reached their agreement, and only Aerith could stop it now. If she wanted to. Did he want her to? He could not stop thinking of his book. He could not stop thinking of Aerith. She certainly looked grave.
My weaving sells well, and I am ready to buy another loom and take an apprentice. But that may not be what you mean. I am ready to tend a husband.
Suddenly she grinned, a lovely grin that divided her face in two.
Especially one with such beautiful long eyebrows.
Loyal's ears quivered, and so did Elder Hammond's, if not so much. Women were very free in their talk among themselves, so he had heard, but usually they tried not to embarrass men with it. Usually. His mother's ears actually trembled with amusement. The older man cleared his throat.
This is serious, Aerith. Come now. If you are sure, take his hands.
Number two.
Without hesitation, she came to stand in front of Loyal, smiling up at him as she took his hands in hers. Her small hands felt very warm. His felt numb and cold. He swallowed. It really was going to happen.
Aerith, daughter of Iva, daughter of Aelar,
Elder Hammond said, holding one hand palm down over each of their heads.
will you take Loyal, son of Erent, son of Helen, as husband, and vow under the light and by the tree to treasure, esteem, and love him so long as he lives, to care for him and tend him, and to guide his feet on the path they should follow?
Under the light and by the tree, I so vow. Aerith's voice was firm and clear, and her smile seemed to have grown wider than her face.
Loyal, son of Arent, son of Helen, will you accept Aerith, daughter of Iva, daughter of Aelar, as wife, and vow under the light and by the tree to treasure, esteem, and love her so long as she lives, to care for her, and to heed her guidance?
Loyal took a deep breath. His ears trembled. He wanted to marry her, he did, just not yet.
Under the light and by the tree I so vow,
He said hoarsely.
Then under the light and by the tree I declare you wed. May the blessings of the light and the tree be upon you always.
Loyal looked down at his wife. His wife. She raised a hand and stroked slender fingers along his mustaches. The beginnings of mustaches, anyway. You are very handsome, and I think mustaches would be beautiful on you. A beard, too.
Nonsense,
His mother said. Surprisingly, she was dabbing at her eyes with a small lace handkerchief. She was never emotional.
He's much too young for that sort of thing.
For a moment, he thought Aerith's ears began to slant back. That had to be his imagination. He had had a number of long talks with her. She was a wonderful conversationalist. Though come to think, for the most part, she listened. But what little she did say was always very cogent. And he was sure she possessed no sort of temper at all. He had no time to think on it in any event. Resting her hands on his arms, she rose on tiptoes, and he bent to rub his nose against hers. In truth, they nosed for longer than they should have, with Elder Hammond and his mother present, but others faded from his thoughts as he inhaled his wife's scent and she his. And the feel of her nose on his. Pure bliss. He cupped the back of her head and barely had the presence of mind not to finger her ear. She tugged a tuft on one of his. After a while, a very long while it seemed, voices intruded.
It is still raining, Togrel. You cannot seriously be suggesting we set out again when we have a sound roof over our heads and proper beds to sleep in for a change. No, I say, no. I will not sleep on the ground tonight, or in a barn, or worst of all, in a house where my feet and knees hang over the end of the largest bed available. There have been times I've seriously thought of refusing hospitality, and to the pit with rudeness. If you insist,
His mother said grudgingly.
but I want an early start come morning. I refuse to waste an hour more than I must. The book of translation must be opened as soon as possible.
Loyal jerked erect, aghast.
That's what the great stump is discussing? They can't do that. Not now. We must leave this world eventually, so we can come to it when the wheel turns,
His mother said, striding to the nearest fireplace to spread her skirts again.
That is written. Now is exactly the right time, and the sooner the better. Is that what you think, Elder Hammond?
Loyal asked worriedly.
No, my boy, not at all. Before we left, I gave a speech of 3 hours that I think swayed a few minds in the right direction.
Elder Hammond picked up a tall yellow pitcher and filled a blue cup, but rather than drink, he frowned into the tea.
Your mother has swayed more, I fear. She may even get her decision in months, as she says.
Aerith filled a cup for his mother, then two more, bringing one to him. His ears quivered with embarrassment yet again. He should have done that. He had a great deal to learn about being a husband, but he knew that much.
I wish I could address the stump,
He said bitterly.
You sound eager, husband.
Husband? That meant Aerith was very serious. It was almost as bad as being called son loyal. What would you say to the stump?
I won't have him embarrassed, Aerith,
his mother said before he could open his mouth.
Loyal writes well, and Elder Hammond says he may have the makings of a scholar about him, but he gets tongue-tied before even 100. Besides, he's only a boy.
Elder Hammond had said that? Loyal wondered when his ears would stop quivering. Any married man may address the stump, Aerith said firmly. There was no doubt this time. Her ears definitely slanted back. Will you allow me to tend my own husband, Mother Covrew? His mother's mouth moved, but no sound came out, and her eyebrows were halfway up her forehead. He did not think he had ever seen her so taken aback, though she must have expected this. A wife always took precedence with her husband over his mother. Well, husband, what would you say? He was not eager, he was desperate. He took a long swallow of the spice-scented tea, but his mouth felt just as dry afterward. His mother was right. The more people were listening, the more he tended to forget what he intended to say and go off on tangents. In truth, he had to admit that sometimes he rambled a bit with only a few listeners. Just a bit, now and then. He knew the forms. A child of 50 knew the forms. Yet he could not make the words come. The few listening to him now were not just any few. His mother was a famous speaker, Elder Hammond a noted one, not to mention being an elder. And there was Aerith. A man wanted to stand well in his wife's eyes. Turning his back on them, he strode to the nearest window and stood rolling the teacup between his palms. The window was sized decently, though the panes set in the carved casement were no larger than those in the rooms below. The rain had dwindled to a drizzle falling from a gray sky, and despite bubbles in the glass, he could make out the trees beyond the fields, pine and sour gum, and the occasional oak, all full of new growth. Elgarn's people tended their forest well, clearing out the deadfall to rob wildfire of its tinder. Fire had to be used carefully. The words came more easily now that he could not see the others watching him. Should he begin with the longing? Could they dare leave if they would begin dying in a handful of years? No. That question would have been addressed first thing and suitable answers found, else the stump would have finished inside a year. Light, if he did not address the stump. For a moment he saw the crowds standing all around him, hundreds and hundreds of men and women waiting to hear his words, perhaps several thousand. His tongue tried to cling to the roof of his mouth. He blinked, and there was only the bubbled glass before him and the trees. He had to do it. He was not particularly brave, whatever Aerith thought, but he had learned about bravery watching humans, watching them hang on no matter how strong the winds grew, fight when they had no hope, fight and win because they fought with desperate courage. Suddenly, he knew what to say.
In the War of the Shadow, we did not huddle in our steading, hoping no Trollocs or Murdral would be driven to enter. We did not open the book of translation and flee. We marched alongside the humans and fought the Shadow. In the Trolloc Wars, we neither hid in the steading nor opened the book of translation. We marched with the humans and fought the Shadow. In the darkest years, when hope seemed gone, we fought the Shadow. And by the War of the 100 Years, we had learned not to get ourselves tangled in human affairs,
his mother put in. That was allowed. Speaking could turn into a debate unless the pure beauty of your words held the listeners. She had once spoken from sunrise to sunset in favor of a very unpopular position without a single interruption, and the next day no one had risen to speak against it. He could not form beautiful sentences. He could only say what he believed. He did not turn from the window.
The War of the 100 Years was a human affair, and none of ours. The shadow is our affair. When it is the shadow that must be fought, our axes have always grown long handles. Perhaps in a year, or 5 or 10, we will open the book of translation. But if we do it now, we cannot run away with any real hope of safety. Tarmangaiden is coming, and on that hangs the fate not only of this world, but of any world we might flee to. When fire threatens the trees, we do not run away and hope that the flames will not follow us. We fight. Now the shadow is coming like wildfire, and we dare not run from it.
Something was moving among the trees. All along the line he could see. A herd of cattle? A very big herd, if so.
That isn't bad, his mother said. Much too plain-spoken to carry any weight at a steading stump, much less the great stump, of course, but not bad. Go on. Frolics,
He breathed. That was what it was. Thousands of trollocs in black spiked mail spilling out of the trees at a run with scythe-curved swords raised, shaking their spiked spears, some carrying torches. Trollocs as far as he could see to left and right. Not thousands, tens of thousands. Aerith pushed in beside him at the window and gasped.
So many. Are we going to die, Loyal?
She did not sound afraid. She sounded excited.
Not if I can warn Rand and the others.
He was already starting for the door. Only Aes Sedai and Ashaman could save them now.
Here, my boy, I think we may need these.
He turned just in time to catch the long-handled axe that Elder Hammond tossed him. The other man's ears were back all the way, laid flat against his skull. Loyal realized his own were, too.
Here, Aerith,
His mother said calmly, lifting down one of the pruning knives.
if they get inside, we will try to hold them at the stairs.
You are my hero, husband, Aerith said as she took the knife's shaft in hand.
But if you get yourself killed, I will be very angry with you.
She sounded as if she meant it. And then he and Elder Hammond were running down the corridor together, pounding down the stairs, bellowing at the tops of their lungs a warning and a battle cry that had not been heard in over 2,000 years.
Trollocs coming! Up axes and clear the field! Trollocs coming!
So I will take care of Tyr, O king, while you... Abruptly, Rand wrinkled his nose. It was not that he actually smelled a rotting midden heap suddenly, but he felt as if he did, and the feeling was getting stronger. Shadow spawn, Catswain said quietly, putting down her embroidery and rising. His skin tingled as she embraced the source. Or maybe it was Olivia, walking briskly toward the windows after the Green Sister. Min stood drawing a pair of throwing knives from her coat sleeves. At the same instant, through the thick walls, he faintly heard Ogier shouting. There was no mistaking those deep drum-like voices.
Trollocs coming! Up axes and clear the field!
With an oath, he leaped to his feet and ran to a window. Trollocs in thousands came running through the light rain across the newly planted fields. Trollocs as tall as Ogier and taller. Trollocs with ram's horns and goat's horns, wolves' snouts, boars' snouts. Trollocs with eagles' beaks and crests of feathers. Muddy earth splashing beneath boots and hooves and paws. Silent as death they ran. Black-clad Murdral galloped behind them, cloaks hanging as if they were standing still. He could see 30 or 40, How many more on other sides of the house? Others had heard the Ogier's cries, or maybe just looked out a window. Lightning began to fall among the charging Trollocs, silvery bolts that struck with a roar and hurled huge bodies in every direction. In other places, the ground erupted in flames, fountaining dirt and parts of Trollocs, heads, arms, legs wheeling through the air. Balls of fire struck them and exploded, each killing dozens. But on they ran as fast as horses, if not faster. Rand could not see the weaves that drew some of those lightning bolts. Now that they were discovered, the Trollocs began to shout, a wordless roar of rage. In the thatch-roofed outbuildings, large, sturdy barns and stables, some of Bashir's Saldaeans stuck their heads out and quickly pulled them back again, drawing the doors shut behind them. You told your Aes Sedai they could channel to defend themselves? He said calmly. Do I look fool enough not to? Logain snarled. At another window, he already held Sayadine, nearly as much as Rand could draw. He was weaving as fast as he could. Do you intend to help or just watch, my Lord Dragon? There was entirely too much sarcasm in that, but now was not the time to bring it up. Drawing a deep breath, Rand gripped the casement on either side of the window against the dizziness that would come. The dragon's gold-maned heads on the backs of his hands seemed to writhe, and reached out to seize the power. His head spun as Sayadine flooded into him, icy flames and crumbling mountains, a chaos trying to pull him under, but blessedly clean. He still felt the wonder of that. His head spun and his stomach wanted to empty itself, the odd illness that should have gone with the taint. Yet that was not why he clung to the casement even harder. The one power filled him, but in that moment of dizziness, Lews Therin had seized it away from him. Numb with horror, he stared at the Trollocs and Myrddraal racing toward the outbuildings. With the power in him, he could make out the pins fastened to massive mailed shoulders, the silver whirlwind of the Off-Right Band, and the blood-red trident of the Cobal, the forked lightning of the Graemland, and the hooked axe of the Algol, the iron fist of the Daimon, and the red blood-stained fist of the Noman. And there were skulls. The horned skull of the Dovol, and the piled human skulls of the Gargael, and the skull cloven by a scythe-curved sword of the Jinnen, and the dagger-pierced skull of the Banshin. Trollocs liked skulls, if they could be said to like anything. It seemed the 12 principal bands might all be involved, and some of the lesser. He saw pins he did not recognize, what seemed a staring eye,
Yeah, be
a
right back.
dagger-pierced hand, a man-shape wrapped in flames. They neared the outbuildings, where swords were beginning to thrust through the thatch, as the Saldaeans tried to cut ways onto the roofs. Thatch was tough. They would need to work desperately hard. Odd the thoughts that came when a madman who wanted to die might well kill you in the next heartbeat. Flows of air pushed the casement in front of him out in a shower of shattered glass and fragmented wood. My hands, Lews Therin panted. Why can't I move my hands? I need to raise my hands. Earth, air, and fire went into a weave Rand did not know. 6 of them at once. Except that as soon as he saw the spinning, he did know. Blossom of fire. 6 vertical red shafts appeared among the Trollocs, 10 feet tall and thinner than Rand's forearm. The nearest Trollocs would be hearing their shrill whine, but unless memories had been passed down from the War of the Shadow, they would not realize they were hearing death. Lews Therin spun the last thread of air, and fire blossomed. With a roar that shook the manor house, each red shaft expanded in a heartbeat to a disk of flame 30 feet across. Horned heads and snouted heads flew into the air, and pinwheeling arms, booted legs, and legs that ended in paws or hooves. Trollocs 100 paces and more away from the explosions went down, and only some got up again. Even as he was spinning those webs, Lews Therin spun 6 others. Spirit touched with fire, the weave for a gateway, but then he added touches of earth, so and so. The familiar silvery blue vertical streaks appeared, spaced out not far from the manor house, ground Rand knew well, rotating into, not openings, but the misty back of a gateway, 4 paces by 4. Rather than remaining open, they rotated shut again, opening and shutting continuously. And rather than remaining fixed, they sped toward the Trollocs. Gateways and yet not. Death gates. As soon as the death gates began to move, Loose Theron knotted the webs, a loose knotting that would hold only for minutes before allowing the whole weave to dissipate, and began spinning again. More death gates, more blossoms of fire, rattling the walls of the house, blowing Trollocs apart, flinging them down. The first of the speeding death gates struck the Trollocs and carved through them. It was not just the slicing edge of the constantly opening and closing gateways. Where a death gate passed, there simply were no Trollocs remaining.
My hands, the madman howled. My hands!
Slowly, Rand raised his hands, stuck them through the opening. Immediately, Loose Theron wove fire and earth in intricate combination, and red filaments flashed from Rand's fingertips, 10 from each fanning out. Arrows of fire, this, he knew. As soon as those vanished, more appeared, so fast they seemed to flicker rather than actually go away. Trollocs, struck by the filaments, jerked as flesh and blood, heated in a flash beyond boiling, erupted, jerked and fell, holes blown entirely through their thick bodies. Often 2 or 3 behind fell victim as well before a filament died. He spread his fingers and moved his hands slowly from side to side, spreading death across the whole line. Blossoms of fire appeared that were not his weaving, and death gates, slightly smaller than Loose Theron's, and arrows of fire that must have been Logain's. The other Ashaman were paying attention, but few would be where they could see those last 2 webs spun. Trollocs fell by the hundreds, the thousands, riven by lightning bolts and balls of fire, blossoms of fire, and death gates and arrows of fire. The earth itself exploding beneath their feet, yet on they raced, roaring and waving their weapons, Myrddraal riding close behind, black-bladed swords in hand. As they reached the outbuildings, some of the Trollocs surrounded them, pounding on the doors with their fists, prying at the boards of the walls with their swords and spears, tossing flaming torches onto the thatched roofs. Saldaeans up there, working their horsebows as fast as they could, kicked the torches back down, but some hung up on the edges of the roof and flames began catching even on damp thatch. The fires, Rand thought at Loose Theron. The Saldaeans will burn. Do something. Loose Theron made no reply, only wove death as fast as he could and hurled it at the Trollocs, death gates and arrows of fire. A Myrddraal, riddled by 6 red filaments, was flung from its saddle, then another. A third lost its head to an arrow of fire and an explosion of boiled blood and flesh, but that one rode on, waving its sword, as if it did not know it was dead. Rand was seeking them out. If the Myrddraal were all killed, the Trollocs might well turn and run. Death gates and arrows of fire only, Loose Theron spun now. The mass of Trollocs was too close to the manor house for blossoms of fire. Some of the Ashaman apparently did not realize that right away. The room shook to great booms. The whole manor house shook, as if struck by huge sledgehammers, shook as though about to shake apart. And then there were no more explosions, except where a fireball erupted, or the ground itself exploded to throw Trollocs like broken toys. The sky seemed to rain lightning. Silver blue bolts struck continuously so close to the house that the hair on Rand's arms and chest tried to lift, the hair on his head. Some of the Trollocs succeeded in forcing open the doors to one of the barns and began flooding inside. He shifted his hands, cutting down those still outside with flickering red filaments that blew holes in them. Some had managed to get inside, but those the Saldaeans would have to deal with themselves. On another barn and a stable, flames were beginning to ripple up the thatch, men coughing from the acrid smoke as they shot their bows. Listen to me, Loose Theron. The fire. You must do something. Loose Theron said nothing, just spun its webs to kill Trollocs and Myrddraal. Logain! Rand shouted. The fires! Put them out! The other man did not answer either, but Rand saw the weaves that pulled the heat from the flames, killing him. They just vanished, leaving behind cold, blackened thatch where not even tendrils of smoke rose. Death walked among the Trollocs, but they were so close that even the explosions of fireballs rattled the house now. Suddenly there was a Myrddraal afoot beside the window, pale eyeless face as calm as an Aes Sedai's, black sword already stabbing toward him. 2 thrown Aiel spears took it in the chest, and a throwing knife blossomed in its throat, but it only staggered before resuming the thrust. Rand bunched his fingers together, and just before the blade reached him, 100 arrows of fire ripped through the Myrddraal, flinging it back 20 paces to lie riddled and leaking black blood onto the ground. Murdrol seldom died right away, but this one never twitched. Hurriedly, Rand searched for more targets, but he realized that Luce Theron had stopped channeling. He could still feel the goosebumps that told him Cadswain and Olivia held the power, still feel Sayadine and Logain, but the other man was weaving no more webs either. Outside, the ground lay carpeted with bodies and parts of bodies from the fields almost to the manor house walls. Within paces of them, a few horses belonging to Murdrol still stood, one holding up a foreleg as if it were broken. A headless Murdrol staggered about, flailing wildly with its sword, and here and there a Trolloc jerked or tried to lift itself and failed, but nothing else moved. It's done, he thought. It's done, Luce Theron. You can release Sayadine now. Haralyn and Delilah were standing on the table, veiled and spears in hand. Min stood beside them, her face grim, a throwing knife in either hand. The bond was full of fear, and not for herself, he suspected. They had saved his life, but he had to save it himself now. A close run thing, Logain muttered. If this had happened before I arrived. A close run thing. He gave himself a shake and released the source, turning away from his glassless window. Did you intend keeping these new weaves for your favorites like Taim? Those gateways. Where did we send those Trollocs? I just copied your weave exactly. It doesn't matter where they went, Rand said absently. His attention was focused on Luce Theron. The madman, the bloody voice in his head, drew a little deeper on the power. Let go, man. Shadow Spawn can't survive passing through a gateway.
I want to die.
Luce Theron said.
I want to join Elena.
If you really wanted to die, why did you kill Trollocs? Rand thought. Why kill that Murdrol? People will find groups of dead Trollocs and maybe Murdrol without a mark on them, he said aloud.
I seem to remember dying,
Luce Theron murmured.
I remember how I did it.
He drew deeper still, and small pains grew in Rand's temples. Not too many in any one place, though. The destination shifts every time a death gate opens. Rand rubbed at his temples. That pain was a warning. He was close to the amount of Sayadine he could hold without dying or being burnt out. You can't die yet, he told Luce Theron. We have to reach Tarmangaiden or the world dies. A death gate, Logain said, his voice tinged with distaste. Why are you still holding the power? He asked suddenly. And so much. If you're trying to show me that you're stronger than I am, I already know it. I saw how large your death gates were compared to mine, and I'd say you're holding every drop of Sayadine that you can safely. That certainly caught everyone's attention. Min tucked her knives away and leapt down from the table, the bond suddenly so full of fear it seemed to throb with it. Haralyn and Delilah exchanged worried glances, then went back to staring out the windows. They did not trust Trollocs to be dead until the corpses were 3 days buried. Olivia took a step toward him, frowning, but he shook his head slightly, and she turned back to her window, though her frown remained. Cadswain glided down the room, her smooth face sternly composed. What does he feel? She demanded of Min. Don't toy with me, girl. You know the cost of that. I know that he bonded you, and you know I know. Is he afraid? He's never afraid, Min said. Except for me.
Oh, yeah, cheers.
She set her jaw stubbornly and folded her arms beneath her breasts, fixing Cadswain with a glare that dared the Green Sister to do her worst. By the tangled mix of emotions ranging from fear to shame that she tried to keep out of the bond and failed, she had some idea of what Cadswain's worst could be. I'm standing under your nose, Rand said. If you want to know how I feel, ask me. Luce Theron, he thought. There was no answer, and the Sayadine filling him did not slacken. His temples began to throb. Well, Cadswain said impatiently, I feel right as well, water. Luce Theron. But I have a rule for you, Cadswain. Don't threaten Min again. In fact, leave her alone altogether. Well, the boy shows some teeth. Golden birds and fish, stars and moons, swayed as she shook her head. Just don't show too many. And you might ask the young woman whether she wants your protection. Strangely, Min had shifted her frown to him, and the bond was threaded with irritation. Right, it was bad enough that she did not like him worrying about her. Now she seemed to want to take on Cadswain single-handed, something he would not be eager to do himself. We can die at Common Garden, Luce Theron said, and suddenly the power drained out of him. Be released, Logain said, as if he were suddenly on Cadswain's side. I know, she told him. He whipped his head around in surprise. Min can deal with you in your own way if she wishes, Rand said, starting for the door. But don't threaten her. Yes, he thought. We can die at Common Garden. Chapter 20. The Golden Crane. The wind had died away as the rain diminished, but gray clouds still hid the sun. The fine drizzle was enough to dampen Rand's hair, however, and begin soaking into his gold-embroidered black coat as he walked through the dead Trollocs. Logain had spun a shield of air so that raindrops bounced from it, or apparently slid down nothing to cascade around him. But Rand refused to risk Luce Theron seizing Sayadine again. The man had said he could wait until the last battle to die, but how far could you trust a madman on anything? Madman? Luce Theron whispered. Am I any better than you? He cackled with wild laughter. Now and then, Nandera looked over her shoulder at Rand. A tall, sinewy woman, her graying hair hidden beneath her brown shufa. She led the maidens, those on this side of the dragon wall at least, but she had chosen to lead his bodyguard of maidens personally. Her green eyes, all he could see of her sun-dark face above her black veil, carried little expression, yet he was sure she was worried over him not protecting himself from the rain. Maidens noticed what seemed out of the ordinary. He hoped she would keep quiet. You have to trust me, Luce Theron said. Trust me. All right, I'm pleading with a voice in my head. I must be mad. Nandera and the rest of the 50 veiled maidens made a large ring around Rand, almost shoulder to shoulder, prodding their spears into every Trolloc and Murdraul they passed, casually stepping over huge severed arms and legs, severed heads, bearing horns or tusks or sharp teeth. Occasionally a Trolloc groaned or feebly tried to crawl away, or to lunge at them, snarling, but not for long. War with Trollocs was like war with rabid dogs. You killed them or they killed you. There was no parley, no surrender, no middle ground. Rain had kept the vultures away so far, yet crows and ravens flapped everywhere, black feathers glistening wetly, and if any were the Dark One's eyes, it did not stop them alighting to pluck out Trollocs' eyes, or see whether they could wrench loose some other gobbet. Enough of the Trollocs had been torn apart that the birds had rich feasting. None went near any dead Murdraul, though, and they shunned Trollocs too near a Murdraul. That indicated nothing beyond caution. Very likely the Murdraul smelled wrong to the birds. A Murdraul's blood would etch steel if left on it very long. To ravens and crows, it must have smelled like poison. The surviving Saldaeans shot the birds with arrows or skewered them on their sinuously curved swords, or simply bludgeoned them with shovels or hoes or rakes, anything that could make a handy club. In the borderlands, leaving a crow or raven alive was unthinkable. There, they were all too often the Dark One's eyes. Yet there were too many. Hundreds of black-feathered shapes lay crumpled among the Trollocs, and for every corpse there seemed to be hundreds more squabbling loudly over the softer bits, including pieces of their dead fellows. The Ashaman and Aes Sedai had long since given up trying to kill them all. I don't like my men tiring themselves this way, Logain said. His men. Or the sisters, for that matter. Gabriella and Tobane will be near exhaustion by nightfall. He had bonded the two Aes Sedai, so he should know. What if there's another attack? All around the manor house and outbuildings, brief fires flared, so hot that people shielded their eyes against them, as Aes Sedai and Ashaman incinerated Trolloc and Myrddraal dead where they lay. There were too many to afford the labor of gathering them into heaps. With fewer than 20 Aes Sedai, fewer than a dozen Ashaman, and maybe 100,000 Trollocs, it was going to be a long job. Very likely, before it was done, the stench of decay would be added to the already foul odors in the air, the fetid coppery smell of shadow-spawn blood, the stink of whatever had been in the Trollocs' intestines when they were ripped open. Best not to think too closely on that. There might not be a farmer or villager left alive between the manor house and the spine of the world. That had to be where the Trollocs had come from, the waygate outside Steading Shangtai. At least Loyal's home itself was safe. Neither Trollocs nor Myrddraal would enter a steading unless driven, and it required considerable driving. Would you rather let them rot?
Battery low.
Oh, everything just going. That battery's dead. So, I guess I'll end the live for tonight. I gotta charge that up. Alright. But I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.